My name is Aaron Knight. I am 45 years old. This happened last winter when I rented an old RV to escape the ghosts of my past and seek solitude in the remote stretches of Canaan Valley, West Virginia. I was haunted by memories of a tragedy I could never fully atone for, and I believed that isolation among the rolling hills and forgotten ghost towns might finally grant me some measure of redemption. I arrived in Canaan Valley on a bleak, overcast afternoon. The valley was shrouded in heavy fog, and the chill in the air seeped into my bones. My RV, a creaky, outdated vehicle with a sputtering generator and unreliable electrical system, groaned under the weight of years gone by. As I set it up near the edge of a long-abandoned ghost town, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trespassing on ground steeped in sorrow. The locals had been kind enough to share warnings. At a small dusty bar in a nearby town, Marty, the gruff, soft-spoken bartender, recounted tales of the Lady in White. He described her as a spectral figure doomed to wander these lands, her tragic eyes reflecting unbearable loss. "They say she only appears to those who are carrying a heavy burden," Marty murmured as he wiped down the counter, his gaze distant. Later, I met Ranger Elaine Carter on a routine patrol near my campsite. Her words, gentle yet laced with an unspoken warning, still echo in my mind. "This valley holds memories, Aaron. Some of them are better left undisturbed." The first night in the RV was quiet, except for the constant hum of the generator, which struggled to keep the lights on. I lay awake, listening to the howling wind and the distant rustle of leaves, but it wasn't long before small anomalies began to disturb my solitude. In the early hours of the morning, I discovered a set of footprints circling the RV, a series of delicate, almost tentative steps that vanished into the fog. A sense of unease settled over me, but I dismissed it as the work of a stray animal or my overactive imagination. One morning, as I sipped stale coffee in the dim light of the RV's kitchenette, I found an antique locket resting on the doorstep. The locket was tarnished and inscribed with initials that sparked a distant memory of a name I once knew all too well. A name tied to the tragedy that had shattered my life. My heart pounded as I realized that this was no mere coincidence. It was as if the past had found a way to breach the fragile walls of my self-imposed exile. That evening, the weather took a turn for the worse. A sudden, biting cold snap set in, and a heavy fog rolled in, blanketing the valley in a ghostly pallor. The RV's electrical system flickered erratically, plunging me into intermittent darkness. In the midst of this disorientation, I began to notice something unnerving. Whispered voices carried on the wind, soft and mournful, as though the valley itself were crying out in sorrow. I tried to anchor myself in rationality, attributing the strange sounds to the wind passing through cracks in the RV. But deep down, I knew these were not mere tricks of acoustics. They were echoes of pain, perhaps even the lamentations of the Lady in White herself. I found myself compelled to venture outside. Wrapped in a threadbare jacket, I stepped into the cold, fog-draped night. The landscape was eerily silent, save for the crunch of my boots on frost-hardened ground. As I walked, I caught fleeting glimpses of a figure in the periphery of my vision. A woman in a flowing white dress, her eyes distant and sorrowful. She moved gracefully, almost as if she were floating just above the earth, disappearing behind ancient trees before I could get a proper look. The sightings grew more persistent. Each time I saw her, her eyes seemed to reflect not only despair but also a silent accusation, as if she were judging me for my past transgressions. I began to feel that her presence was no random occurrence. It was as if she was drawn to my suffering, a spectral mirror reflecting the remorse that I had long tried to bury. One particularly harrowing night, The fog thickened to an almost tangible density, and the RV's interior grew inexplicably cold. The temperature dropped so sharply that my breath became visible. I sat rigidly, staring at the condensation swirling on the window, when a knock echoed from outside. Heart hammering in my chest, I peered through the glass. There, illuminated by the weak beam of my failing flashlight, was the lady in white. Her eyes, glimmering with unshed tears and a haunting sorrow, locked with mine. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of us moved. Then, as if satisfied with my silent acknowledgement of guilt, she slowly faded into the darkness, leaving behind an overwhelming silence that swallowed the sound of my racing heart. The next day, still trembling from the encounter, I ventured into the ghost town. The dilapidated buildings stood as crumbling sentinels of a bygone era. I wandered aimlessly along overgrown paths until I discovered an old chapel at the edge of the town. Its wooden doors creaked ominously as I pushed them open, and the inside was choked with dust and the weight of long-forgotten sorrow. In a rickety pew I found a decaying diary. Its pages, yellowed with age, chronicled the tragic tale of a young woman wronged by those she once trusted. A tale that bore a striking resemblance to the burden I carried. As I read her words, a sense of profound connection stirred within me. Was her pain, her guilt, somehow intertwined with mine? In that moment, the boundaries between the past and present began to blur. I was no longer just a visitor in this forsaken place. I had become part of its dark tapestry. The diary spoke of betrayal, of a life lost to regret, and of the eternal wandering of the lady in white, doomed to mourn the mistakes of others. I felt the weight of her sorrow pressing against me, a relentless reminder that the past could never truly be exorcised. That night, I resolved to confront my inner demons. I returned to the chapel, the diary clutched tightly in my hand, and sat in the silence of its decay. Outside, the wind began to whisper again, soft and relentless, as though urging me to unburden my soul. In a trembling voice, I began to confess aloud all that I had kept hidden for so long, the choices that had led to irreversible loss, the regrets that haunted my every waking moment. With each word, the oppressive cold that had seeped into my bones seemed to ebb, replaced by a bittersweet release. As I spoke, the chapel doors creaked open once more, and I saw her. The lady in white stood in the doorway, ethereal and sorrowful. Her eyes, once accusatory, now held a glimmer of understanding. In that charged silence, it felt as though time itself had slowed. I continued to confess, the words tumbling out in a desperate plea for absolution. The ghost's expression softened, her form flickering with a light that was almost warm. And then, as if in response to my confession, she slowly receded into the mist. I left the chapel that night with a heavy, conflicted heart. The encounter did not bring instant redemption or miraculous forgiveness, but it left me with a profound realization. I could not escape my past, but I could face it. The lady in white had not come to condemn me, but to force me to confront the burden I carried. In the days that followed, the oppressive fog gradually lifted, and the valley began to reveal a subdued beauty beneath its melancholic shroud. The RV's temperamental systems improved slightly, as if the valley itself had chosen to ease its grip on me. I spent my remaining days in Canaan Valley in quiet reflection, piecing together the remnants of my shattered spirit. I spoke with Ranger Elaine on a final visit, and she smiled knowingly when I recounted my experiences. "Sometimes the land shows us what we need to see," she said softly. I eventually left Canaan Valley, the memory of that ghostly figure forever etched into my mind. The experience did not cure my guilt, nor did it erase the sorrow of the past, but it forced me to acknowledge it. I returned to my everyday life with a new perspective, a realization that redemption is not a destination but an ongoing journey, one that requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to face the ghosts within. Even now, I can't help but wonder if the lady in white still roams those forlorn paths, drawn to the lingering pain of those who wander there. I like to think that somewhere in the vast, haunted expanse of West Virginia, she continues her eternal vigil, a silent guardian of the souls brave enough to confront their own darkness. And as for me, I carry her memory as both a burden and a blessing, a reminder that even in the deepest isolation, there is the possibility of healing, if only one has the courage to face the truth. My name is Charlotte Hayes. I am 32 years old. This happened in the fall of last year when I decided to escape the chaos of my former corporate life and seek solace and adventure in the wilds of New River Gorge, West Virginia. I had meticulously planned our group trip, convinced that nature's raw beauty could heal our frayed nerves. I gathered 3 companions for the journey. Mark Sullivan, whose adventurous, impulsive spirit often clashed with his darker, self-destructive tendencies. Dina Roberts, a sensitive freelance writer with an uncanny intuition about the unseen. And Jason J. Pierce, whose charming and witty exterior masked secrets I would soon regret overlooking. We piled into my old RV, its battered exterior and outdated GPS a constant reminder that we were venturing far from any semblance of modern convenience. Our destination was a secluded clearing known by locals as Grave's Edge, a name that sent a chill down my spine despite my best rationalizations. We arrived late on a cool October evening, the landscape awash with the fiery hues of autumn. Yet, from the moment we set up camp, an unsettling sense of foreboding permeated the air. On our first night, as I fumbled with the malfunctioning generator and the RV's intermittent power left us in sporadic darkness, I noticed something odd. Footprints circled our parked vehicle. Irregular, almost deliberate impressions that didn't match any animal tracks I knew of. Dina, ever the sensitive soul, remarked in a hushed tone that the ground bore strange symbols, almost ritualistic in nature, scratched near the base of a gnarled oak. "It's like someone, or something, wanted to leave a mark," she whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows beyond our flickering circle of light. As the night deepened, the malfunctioning communications equipment sputtered static, and at one point, a voice that sounded eerily like one of our own whispered my name through the line. I dismissed it as a trick of the failing tech, but a nagging feeling told me we were not alone. The next day, tensions began to surface. Mark's impatience grew as he urged us to explore deeper into the wilderness, despite my reservations. "We're here to experience nature at its rawest," he argued, his eyes glinting with reckless excitement. Meanwhile, Jay's evasiveness about his late-night phone calls only deepened the divide within our small group. Dina, sensing the increasing unease, kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone, or something, to materialize from the dense forest. That evening, as a violent thunderstorm battered the area, I took a moment alone outside the RV. The wind howled like a living thing, and amidst the crashing rain I saw a silhouette standing at the edge of the clearing. It was a figure that mimicked Mark's stance perfectly, even down to the slight tilt of his head. I blinked, and when I looked again, the figure had melted into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but the echo of a soft, mocking laugh. My heart pounded as I retreated into the RV, where I found the others agitated by their own inexplicable encounters. Dina confided that she had seen fleeting, distorted faces in the rain-soaked windows, faces that morphed into something unrecognizable. I began to wonder if we were dealing not only with human threats but with something far more sinister. That night, our worst fears took shape. I awoke to a low, guttural chanting echoing through the RV. My phone, which had been dead for hours, buzzed insistently. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but the voice that answered was all too familiar. It was Mark, but his tone was twisted, laced with panic and dread. "Charlie, help me, please," the voice pleaded before the line went dead. I bolted out of the RV into the torrential rain, shouting his name, but all I found were scattered footprints leading away into the inky darkness, away from the safety of our camp. Within minutes, chaos erupted. A group of rough-looking locals emerged from the underbrush, their eyes cold and predatory. They demanded something in broken, harsh tones that made it clear they were not ordinary passers-by. It quickly became evident they were part of a cannibal cult rumored to be lurking in these backwoods, desperate souls clinging to a brutal tradition. In the ensuing struggle, amidst the pounding rain and blinding flashes of lightning, Mark was dragged away, his muffled screams lost in the cacophony of nature and violence. I scrambled back to the RV, my heart in my throat, and found Jay lurking in the shadows, his face pale and eyes filled with something akin to dread. "We have to get him back," he insisted, though his voice trembled as if he were weighing his own involvement. I didn't trust him. His earlier evasiveness now seemed like the prelude to betrayal. Dina, eyes wide with terror and sorrow, agreed silently, and together we resolved to rescue Mark, if it wasn't too late. Armed with nothing but our dwindling flashlights and the determination to save our friend, we ventured into the storm-soaked wilderness. The forest seemed to shift around us as if aware of our intrusion, branches clawing at our clothes and a sinister wind whispering secrets. We followed the trail of footprints and crude symbols, each step fraught with the terror of the unknown. As we neared a dilapidated barn hidden among the trees, a likely stronghold for the kidnappers, I sensed an ominous presence watching from the periphery. The legends of the skinwalker Marrow came flooding back to me. It was said that Marrow could mimic voices and appearances, sowing distrust among its victims. I couldn't shake the feeling that, even as we hunted for Mark, something was manipulating our perceptions, turning our own fears against us. Inside the barn, the stench of decay and desperation was overwhelming. We found Mark tied to a rickety chair, his face battered and eyes glassy with shock. Before we could free him, we were ambushed by a contingent of the kidnappers, their weapons crude but lethal. In the ensuing melee, Jay's duplicity became horrifyingly clear. I watched in disbelief as he stepped back, almost welcoming the attackers with a subtle nod. His betrayal cut deeper than any physical blow. I had no choice," he stammered when confronted, his eyes darting around in panic. "They promised I'd be safe and rich." His words rang hollow against the backdrop of Mark's agony. In the violent scuffle that followed, the kidnappers reveled in their cruelty. Mark was brutally interrogated, their knives tracing cruel patterns along his skin as they demanded secrets about hidden treasures in the gorge. A tale born of local legend and desperation. I fought through the panic, trying to subdue one of the attackers, while Dina did her best to comfort Mark, whose screams echoed in the dim barn as each blow landed. Amid the chaos, the storm outside reached a fever pitch. Thunder shook the barn as I heard a different, unearthly sound, a guttural, inhuman laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The lights of my portable flashlight flickered wildly, and in one horrifying moment, I saw a figure at the barn's broken doorway. It was the skinwalker, Marrow, its form shifting in the lightning strobe. It mimicked the posture of Mark, but its eyes glowed with a cold, merciless intelligence. As if in command, the creature's presence brought a momentary ceasefire to the attackers, and for a fleeting second, time seemed to suspend in terror. Then, with an unholy speed, the skinwalker lunged, sowing further panic. In the ensuing struggle, one of the kidnappers, already bloodied from his own cruelties, was thrown aside, his body convulsing in a grotesque dance of death. The creature's laugh mingled with the screams of our assailants, creating a cacophony that will haunt me for the rest of my days. When the chaos finally subsided, the barn lay in ruin, and our group was shattered. Mark, though barely clinging to life, was beyond immediate rescue. His body marked with scars that would never fully heal, his spirit tainted by the horror he had endured. Dina's eyes were red-rimmed from sobbing, and Jay, his face a mask of guilt and terror, had disappeared into the dark, leaving me alone to confront the shattered remnants of our hope. I managed to drag Mark out of the barn and back to the relative safety of the RV, which, miraculously, still sputtered to life despite its many flaws. The journey back was a blur of rain-soaked terror and desperate silence. Every rustle of leaves, every distant thunderclap, reminded me that the wilderness was alive with malevolence, and that trust had been betrayed in the worst possible way. Over the following days, local authorities were alerted to our plight, but their involvement was hampered by the region's isolation and the fear among locals of speaking out against a cult that had long operated in the shadows. I spent sleepless nights replaying every moment, haunted by the image of that shape-shifting presence and the betrayal that tore my group apart. Mark's recovery was slow, his physical wounds a constant reminder of the violence we had endured, and the psychological scars were even deeper. I learned later from hushed conversations with locals that Jay had been in contact with the kidnappers for weeks, his motivations driven by desperation and greed, and ultimately, his betrayal had cost us dearly. The skinwalker, Marrow, had been an uninvited specter, a malevolent force that thrived on our vulnerabilities and turned our darkest fears into reality. Now, as I sit here writing these memories, I realize that the wilds of New River Gorge hold secrets far darker than any of us could have imagined. Nature, in all its beauty, can also be a realm of unspeakable horrors, where survival is a constant battle against both human depravity and supernatural malice. I carry the weight of that night with me every day, a reminder that sometimes, in the isolation of the wilderness, the most dangerous enemies come not only from outside, but from within our own hearts. I share this story not to glorify the terror we faced, but to serve as a cautionary tale. When you venture into the deep, unforgiving backwoods of West Virginia, trust is a fragile commodity, and the line between the real and the supernatural is perilously thin. My name is Andrew Carter. I am 34 years old. This happened at Cheat River State Park, West Virginia. I had envisioned a weekend of solace and escape, a brief respite from the relentless pace of urban life. My partner, Monica, and our longtime friend Jake Morrison had joined me on an RV trip into the wild heart of West Virginia. Monica, with her quiet strength and intuition, had been the calming counterbalance to my methodical nature. Jake, ever the thrill-seeker with a penchant for offhand humor, promised adventure, though sometimes his eyes held secrets he never spoke of. We set off on a crisp autumn morning, the RV rumbling along the winding roads, our spirits high and the promise of nature's beauty ahead. The initial hours were unremarkable, a comfortable silence shared between us, the occasional laugh and the radio softly playing classic rock. But as we neared Cheat River State Park, our equipment began to betray us. The RV's generator sputtered and died unexpectedly, leaving us with only a dwindling battery and unreliable cell reception. Navigation, once taken for granted with our outdated maps, soon proved a challenge on the less traveled paths that led deeper into the park's forgotten corridors. That first night, as we set up camp near a cluster of towering pines, the silence was punctured by something unsettling. I remember noticing large, strange footprints near the edge of our camp, a pattern too deliberate and too massive to be made by any known local animal. Monica's eyes met mine as she murmured, "Something's not right." I dismissed it as nerves amplified by isolation, but the creeping sense of dread took root. The next morning, while we collected firewood, I caught a glimpse of something moving among the trees, a shifting figure that vanished before I could focus. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I discovered odd symbols carved deep into the bark of a weathered oak. They resembled markings from indigenous lore, hints of forbidden rites and ancient curses. Monica's gut tightened, and even Jake, who had laughed off the previous night's eerie sounds, fell silent when he saw them. Local legends soon began to surface as we encountered a grizzled park ranger on a routine patrol. In hushed tones, he spoke of a malevolent entity known as the Shade, a creature from old folklore that some believed was the manifestation of a curse invoked by a cannibal cult hidden in these backwoods. His eyes darted nervously around, as if expecting the creature to materialize at any moment. I felt a chill far deeper than the autumn air. Our RV, already a temperamental relic, stalled completely as we attempted to leave the remote area. Stranded in a patch of foreboding wilderness with no reliable way to call for help, the isolation began to press in on us. That night, as darkness swallowed the forest, the first true confrontation occurred. I awoke to a cacophony of rustling and muffled whispers that reverberated through the trees. Monica was awake too, her eyes wide with terror. Before we could piece together what was happening, masked figures emerged from the shadows. They moved with an unnerving precision, their eyes hidden behind crude coverings. I shouted for them to stop, but they ignored my plea, advancing with a predatory calm. In the ensuing chaos, I grabbed Monica's hand, and we made a desperate dash for the RV. Jake's voice rang out behind us, but his tone was strained. There was something in it that made me hesitate. The attackers were not mere drifters. They were organized, part of something far more sinister than a random band of marauders. Within moments, rough hands seized us. In the struggle, Monica was yanked away, and I felt a searing pain as a glinting blade cut into my arm. The world spun, and darkness encroached. I awoke in a cold, dimly lit room, bound to a rickety chair. My head throbbed, and through the haze, I could hear Monica's muffled cries nearby. My eyes adjusted to see crude symbols painted on the walls and shadows that danced in the flickering candlelight. The men, masked and silent, moved about in a ritualistic manner. I soon learned that they were part of a cannibal cult, worshippers of a cursed entity they called the Shade, an ever-shifting specter with glowing eyes and a form that defied description. They believed the Shade granted them power, enforcing their brutal reign in these isolated parts of West Virginia. In the midst of the torment, a betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Jake, our friend and supposed companion, stepped forward with a sinister smile. He whispered apologies that were more of a confession. He had been in contact with these cult members, drawn by his own ambitions or, perhaps, fear of the unknown. His betrayal shattered what trust we had left, and I felt a wave of disgust and betrayal. How could he lead these monsters to us? His actions had sealed our fate. The cult's methods were horrifyingly pragmatic. They combined ancient rituals with modern brutality, subjecting me to psychological torment that left me questioning my very sanity. They spoke in hushed chants, their voices overlapping in a rhythm that stirred something primal within me. At one point, I glimpsed Monica, bound and gagged, her eyes wild with terror as she was dragged into a nearby chamber. The memory of her screams is etched into my mind, fueling my resolve to escape. During our captivity, we also learned that a local guide, who had briefly offered to help us navigate the treacherous terrain, had vanished. Rumors circulated among the captors about his disappearance, and fragments of disturbing messages left behind hinted that his fate was sealed in a fate worse than death. The terror was no longer confined to the supernatural. Human depravity had woven itself into the fabric of our nightmare. One stormy night, as the cult members grew bolder under the erratic influence of the shade, a presence that sometimes possessed their leaders, I found my moment. The room plunged into chaos when an argument among the cultists erupted into violence. The supernatural entity seemed to assert itself, and the cult members turned on one another in frenzied panic. Amid the confusion, I managed to free myself, my adrenaline drowning out the pain and fear. I rushed through dark, narrow corridors with a singular goal: find Monica and escape. The facility was a labyrinth of crude cells and dim hallways. Every creak of the floor and every distant murmur sent my heart racing. I encountered one cultist who tried to block my path. In the ensuing struggle, I overpowered him, his mask falling away to reveal a gaunt, hollow-eyed man whose expression was one of resigned terror. Before I could extract any answers, the creature known as the Shade flickered at the edge of my vision. A shadow among shadows, watching, waiting. Finally, I located Monica, her wrists raw from the bindings. Tears of relief mingled with pain as I untied her, our whispered apologies and promises barely audible over the storm raging outside. Our escape was not without further loss. As we made our way through the darkness, we encountered Jake once more. In a moment of hesitation, he tried to stop us, pleading in a voice torn by guilt and desperation. But before we could decide his fate, cult members ambushed us again. In the melee that followed, chaos reigned. Violence erupted in a brutal dance of survival. Monica and I fought side by side, driven by a primal need to survive. The echo of our struggle merged with the unearthly sounds of the Shade's presence. Amid the carnage, I saw Jake being overwhelmed, his final expressions a mix of regret and terror. Whether he found redemption in those final moments or was simply consumed by the darkness, I will never know. We ran through the woods, adrenaline fueling our every step. The forest, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a maze of terror. The sound of pursuit was relentless, the ragged breaths of our hunters and the sinister whispers of the Shade closing in from all sides. Every step was a battle against despair and physical exhaustion. Our feet pounded the leaf-strewn ground as we darted between ancient trees and gnarled roots. In one particularly harrowing moment, Monica tripped over a hidden root. I reached out desperately to catch her, my heart in my throat as I fumbled with the debris of fallen branches and damp leaves. She looked at me, her eyes burning with the determination despite the pain. "We can't stop now," she urged, and together we pushed forward. The woods seemed to conspire against us. Branches whipped at our faces, and the bitter wind carried voices that sounded eerily like human screams. In a final confrontation that blurred the line between nightmare and reality, we found ourselves face to face with the Shade in a clearing, lit only by the erratic flashes of lightning. Its form was a shifting mass of darkness, eyes glowing with a malevolence that transcended mortal comprehension. For a long, terrifying moment, time seemed to freeze as the creature loomed over us, and I felt the weight of every fear I'd ever known. Instinct and raw survival drove me to confront it. I fumbled for a heavy branch and, with Monica by my side, struck out in a desperate, frenzied assault. The impact seemed to rip through the oppressive silence, and the shade recoiled as if in pain. The creature's form wavered, its edges blurring into the night. It let out a sound, a mournful, inhuman wail, that echoed in the clearing and deep within my soul. In that moment, I realized that our battle was not solely against an otherworldly terror, but also against the darkness that dwelled within us. The betrayal, the torture, the loss of our friend, all had forged us into fighters, hardened by necessity. With one final push, Monica and I sprinted from the clearing, the malevolent echo of the shade chasing us until it faded into the storm. I don't know how long we ran before stumbling upon a remote ranger station. The station was barely operational, a relic of an earlier time, but it offered a fragile hope of rescue. As I collapsed into a chair, soaked in rain and drenched in sweat, the realization hit me that our lives would never be the same. Monica sat silently beside me, her eyes distant and haunted. The events of the past hours etched deeply into her soul. The authorities later dismissed our accounts as the ravings of traumatized survivors, too tangled in folklore and conspiracy to be believed. But I know what I saw. I know the betrayal that tore us apart, and the terror that lurked in those dark woods. The shade is more than just a legend. It is the embodiment of our darkest fears, a nightmare that straddles the line between myth and brutal reality. Even now, in the sterile light of the hospital waiting room as I tend to my wounds, I can still hear the whispers in the dark and see the shifting shadow at the edge of my vision. Our escape was not a victory so much as a harrowing reminder that some corners of the world hold secrets too terrible to be understood. And as the rain continues to fall outside, I wonder if the darkness of Cheat River State Park will ever truly let us go. The memory of that fateful weekend, the betrayal by a friend, the torture inflicted by human cruelty under the guise of ancient rites, and the relentless pursuit by a creature that defies description, will haunt me for the rest of my days. I survived, but at what cost? The wilderness is a place of raw beauty and unspeakable horror, and I have learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to embrace the darkness within and keep moving forward, even when every step feels like a descent into madness. My name is Alex Mercer. I'm 32 years old. This happened one late autumn when I decided to leave behind the clutter of my urban life and rent an old RV for a week of solitude near Cheat Lake in West Virginia. I was seeking refuge from my past, a past marred by personal failures and the crushing weight of guilt. I hoped that by isolating myself in nature, I could finally come to terms with my regrets and perhaps begin the slow process of rebuilding. The drive out to Cheat Lake was uneventful, the roads winding through dense forests and past shimmering stretches of water. I arrived at a small, isolated campsite set back from the main road. The RV I'd rented was a relic. Its once bright exterior now faded and scuffed, its interior full of creaks and groans as if whispering secrets of bygone days. I set up camp with a mix of excitement and apprehension, unaware that the isolation I craved would soon turn into something far more sinister. The first sign that things were off came on the night of my arrival. After a meager dinner prepared on a portable stove, I decided to clean up a bit inside the RV. As I wiped down a dusty mirror above the small sink, I noticed something peculiar. My reflection didn't quite match my movements. At first, I chalked it up to the poor quality of the mirror or my tired eyes. But then, just as I turned away, I caught a glimpse of a figure in the polished surface. A figure that mimicked my posture perfectly, except for the slight, unnatural tilt of its head and the eerie glint in its eyes. My pulse quickened and I forced myself to laugh nervously, blaming the malfunctioning RV lights for playing tricks on my mind. Over the next few days, small oddities began to accumulate. The RV's electrical system flickered unpredictably, and my phone and camera, which I used to document the natural beauty around the lake, recorded brief glitches that appeared to include an extra reflection in the background, a shadowy outline that should not have been there. I noticed that each morning, objects in the RV were slightly rearranged, as if someone, or something, had been meddling while I slept. At first, I rationalized these occurrences as the result of my own absent-mindedness or the clunky nature of the old vehicle. But deep down, a nagging sense of dread started to take hold. One chilly evening, as an unnatural fog began to roll in over Cheat Lake, I sat outside the RV trying to calm my rattled nerves with a cup of lukewarm coffee. The fog was thick, muting the world around me and transforming the familiar landscape into something otherworldly. It was then that I first saw it clearly, a figure in the distance along the shoreline, mirroring my every movement. At first, I thought it was another camper, but as the figure drew nearer, I realized with a shock that it was me, a perfect, unsettling duplicate of myself, standing there with a smile that was just a bit too wide and eyes that held no warmth. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as the figure turned and disappeared behind a stand of trees. That night, I barely slept. In the darkness, I was tormented by images of that doppelganger, always lurking in mirrors, peeking from the edge of shadows, sometimes even whispering my own words back to me in a voice that was both familiar and alien. I began to suspect that the extra reflections I'd been catching were not glitches or coincidences, but manifestations of a darker presence. Was it possible that Cheat Lake was cursed by a force that could project one's inner demons into reality? The next day, still shaken, I decided to visit a nearby gas station in the small town adjacent to the lake. I needed answers, or at least a distraction from the relentless unease gnawing at me. There, I met an elderly man named Mr. Harlan, whose lined face and slow deliberate speech suggested he had seen more than his share of the inexplicable. When I mentioned the strange occurrences around the lake, he leaned in and said, "Son, they say this place shows you what you're really made of. When your guilt and regrets weigh heavy, sometimes the lake has a way of giving you a mirror you'd rather not face." His words sent a chill down my spine. I thanked him and left, his cryptic warning echoing in my mind. Back at the RV, things escalated rapidly. I started finding cryptic messages scrawled on the inside of the mirror, messages in my own handwriting, warning, "The other you is coming." At first, I thought I was hallucinating from an isolation and stress, but then I noticed more tangible evidence, fresh footprints around the RV and along the lakeshore. They resembled my own, yet they veered off in impossible directions, disappearing into areas where I couldn't have gone. I began to feel as if someone was deliberately shadowing me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The nights grew longer and more oppressive. The fog thickened, and the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. I would lie in bed, the rhythmic hum of the RV's failing engine the only sound, while my mind replayed the image of my doppelganger confronting me with every unspoken regret. It was as if the creature was a physical embodiment of all the guilt I had buried deep inside, a part of me that I had long denied and tried to forget. One stormy night, when the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls and the rain battered the RV with relentless fury, I decided that I could no longer endure the torment. I grabbed my car keys and ventured out into the tempest, determined to reach the shoreline and confront whatever was haunting me. The world outside was a disorienting maze of swirling fog and lashing rain. My every step was a struggle against nature's fury and the creeping terror that I was not alone. I finally reached the edge of Cheat Lake. The sight that greeted me was both mesmerizing and horrifying. Under a ghostly full moon, the lake's surface shimmered like liquid silver, and emerging from the water was the unmistakable figure of my doppelganger. It stood at the water's edge, its reflection merging with mine in the rippling surface. The figure stared at me with an expression that was equal parts derision and sorrow, as if it were daring me to confront the darkness within myself. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice barely audible over the crashing of the rain and the pounding of my heart. The figure's lips curled into that unnerving smile. "I am you," it replied, in a voice that was a distorted echo of my own. "I am everything you try to hide, the guilt, the regret, the failures you refuse to accept. I'm here to show you that you can't run from who you really are." I felt as if the ground beneath me had shifted, my entire being trembling under the weight of its words. For a moment, I wavered between anger and despair. My inner demons had always been there, lurking in the recesses of my mind, but to see them personified before me was almost too much to bear. As the storm raged on, the doppelganger stepped forward, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. In a sudden, violent moment, it lunged at me. The encounter was not merely physical, but a collision of my very identity. We struggled by the edge of the lake, my hands grappling with a force that felt as much like an internal battle as a physical one. Every punch and shove was charged with the weight of all my past mistakes, and all the pain I had tried so desperately to suppress. At one point, I found myself pinned against a slick, muddy bank. The doppelganger's eyes bored into mine, and in that moment, I saw flashes of my own failures, broken relationships, missed opportunities, and the relentless self-loathing that had haunted me for years. The creature whispered, "You cannot change the past. You cannot undo your sins." In the midst of that terrifying struggle, something shifted within me. I realized that fighting my inner self would never bring me peace. Instead, I had to accept all the parts of me, the light and the dark, if I ever hoped to move forward. Summoning every ounce of strength, I pushed back with a trembling clarity, not with anger, but with acceptance. "I know you exist," I said softly, my voice breaking with emotion. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm ready to face every part of me, even the parts I fear the most." For a long, agonizing moment, the doppelganger hesitated. The fury in its eyes softened as if it were unraveling before my sincere admission. The wind seemed to hold its breath, and the relentless rain slowed to a pitter-patter as the figure's form wavered. Slowly, the entity began to dissipate into the swirling fog, leaving me alone on the muddy shore with nothing but the echo of my own heartbeat. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, drenched and trembling, staring at the now calm lake. The oppressive fog gradually lifted, and the first tentative rays of dawn broke over the horizon. In that fragile moment of clarity, I realized that the battle had never been against a supernatural force, but against my own inner demons. I had been running from my past for so long that it had taken on a life of its own, haunting me in the most literal way imaginable. I made my way back to the RV with a heavy heart but a newfound resolve. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the scars of that night would likely never fully fade, but I knew that acknowledging my guilt and accepting my flaws was the only way to truly heal. Over the following days, I attempted to restore some semblance of normality to my life, even as the occasional glimpse in a mirror would remind me of the night I confronted my darker self. I eventually left Cheat Lake with the understanding that life is a constant struggle between who we are and who we wish to be. The encounter taught me that redemption isn't about erasing the past or defeating it in a single battle. It's about embracing every part of ourselves and finding the strength to move forward, despite our mistakes. I continued to bear the marks of that night, but now they serve as a reminder that true healing comes from facing the reflection in the mirror, no matter how shattered it might be. And so I walk on, a little wiser and a lot more aware, knowing that the greatest battles we fight are often those within ourselves, fought in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn by the shimmering waters of a haunted lake. My name is Matthew Evans. I am 38 years old. This happened last autumn when I decided to leave behind a life of ceaseless inner turmoil by venturing into the solitude of Seneca Rocks, West Virginia. I was desperate to find some clarity and a respite from the nightmares of my past, a past filled with loss, regret, and a betrayal that still haunted me. I had rented an old RV, a creaking, unreliable relic whose fuel gauge and battery seemed as disillusioned as I was, to serve as my mobile refuge. The winding mountain roads leading to Seneca Rocks were cloaked in an early fog that made everything seem unreal, as if I had entered another world. I parked the RV on a secluded lot near the base of the towering rock formations, a natural fortress against the modern world, and set up camp with the quiet determination of someone seeking escape. Within the first day, an unsettling feeling began to gnaw at me. I noticed inexplicable scratches on the metal side of the RV, almost like symbols carved in haste. At first, I dismissed them as the result of overgrown vines, or perhaps even wildlife, but a creeping sense of dread accompanied each glance in the mirror. On my second morning, while refueling at a dusty local gas station, I met Benny Slim Carter. Benny was a drifter, lean and weather-beaten, with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He struck up a conversation about the area, his tone casual yet laced with warnings. "Seneca's a beautiful place, sure," he said, leaning against a rusted pump, "but don't let its beauty fool you. Folks around here whisper about an evil doppelganger that roams the woods. Some say it's a curse for those with troubled souls, and there's more trouble than just ghost stories if you're not careful." I appreciated his words, but kept a wary distance. I was here to be alone, to confront my demons silently. That evening, while driving back on a fog-enshrouded mountain road, I had my first unnerving encounter. Glancing into a shop window along the roadside, I caught sight of a man who looked exactly like me. Same broad shoulders, same tired eyes, same the way my hair fell. I slammed on the brakes and stared, heart pounding in disbelief. The figure was there for a split second and then vanished into the fog as if he had never been there at all. I tried to rationalize it, perhaps a trick of the light, or my eyes playing games with me after long hours of solitude, but I couldn't shake the image from my mind. Back at the RV, the unease escalated. My once trusted equipment began failing me. The RV's electrical system flickered relentlessly, plunging me into darkness at crucial moments. One night, as a violent storm battered the area, the engine of the RV sputtered to a halt, leaving me stranded on a desolate, rain-soaked road. I tried calling for help on my phone, but the static was all I got. A constant reminder that I was isolated in more ways than one. I remembered a conversation I'd had with Park Ranger Louise Bennett earlier that week when I stopped by a small ranger station. Ranger Bennett, pragmatic and no-nonsense, had given me a curt warning. "There are stories out here, Matthew. Legends about an evil twin. Someone who isn't just a reflection but a force that preys on those who carry deep pain. Just be careful." Her words echoed in my head as the nights grew colder and more sinister. One damp evening, while sifting through a box of old maps and local legends in the RV's cramped kitchen, I discovered a crumpled note tucked beneath a weathered brochure. The note was hastily scrawled, reading, "You see what is hidden. They are coming. Trust not the mirror." My blood ran cold. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet its message was clear, a warning that I was being watched. Days passed in a blurred haze of foreboding encounters and unsettling coincidences. More and more, I found evidence of someone or something mimicking my every move. At dawn, I'd catch fleeting glimpses of a figure on the ridge overlooking the campsite, always in the distance, always silent. Sometimes, when I passed reflective surfaces, a window, a car mirror, I saw not just my own tired face but a stranger's, identical to mine. The growing presence of this doppelganger shattered any remaining sense of control I had over my life. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. After an exhausting day of hiking among the rugged trails near Seneca rocks, I returned to the RV only to find it vandalized. The door was ajar, and inside, scattered belongings testified to a violent intrusion. Amid the disarray, a new note lay on the seat, this one more ominous. "You have seen too much. The new age begins." My pulse raced as I tried to piece together the mystery. My only thought was of Benny's words, the rumors of a cult that worshipped this malevolent doppelganger, using the cover of local drug trafficking and human trafficking to carry out their dark rituals. Before I could make sense of the chaos, the night exploded into terror. I was ambushed while trying to salvage what little I had left in the RV. Men in dark clothing emerged from the woods, their eyes cold and merciless. I struggled to fight back, but overwhelming fear and exhaustion subdued my attempts. They bound me, and in the haze of pain and confusion I was thrown into the back of a rugged truck. I remember the acrid smell of diesel, the rough hands that pulled me along, and the sinister murmurs that I couldn't quite decipher. I soon learned that I had been taken to a secluded hideout near Seneca Rocks, a decrepit warehouse cloaked by towering pines. There, under dim, flickering lights, I was confronted with the cult's horrifying truth. In a squalid makeshift chamber, I saw symbols carved into the walls, and in the center of it all, an altar where they seemed to be preparing for a ritual. And there, standing before me, was the unmistakable figure of my doppelganger. Only this version wore a cruel, twisted smile, his eyes alight with a malice that was entirely unhuman. As the cult members encircled me, one of them, a scarred man they called the Broker, stepped forward. His voice was low and menacing as he proclaimed, "You are the vessel for our new age, Matthew. Your suffering has drawn us, and now you must serve." I struggled against my bindings, my heart pounding as I realized that my very image was the centerpiece of their ritualistic belief. Amid the chaos, Benny reappeared. I had thought of him as a friend, a drifter offering cryptic guidance, but now his betrayal stung like a fresh wound. He stood aside with a conflicted look, his eyes betraying a reluctance that was too late to save me. The realization hit me. Benny was not merely a concerned wanderer, he was an insider, a willing accomplice in the cult's demented plans. As the ritual began, my doppelganger moved closer, his form a perfect, grotesque mirror of my own. He taunted me with whispered echoes of my deepest fears, dredging up memories of war, loss, and the betrayal that had shattered my life. Every word, every gesture was designed to break me, to make me surrender to the darkness within. I felt my sanity teetering on the edge as the cult's chants reached a fevered pitch. In the midst of the brutal interrogation and twisted ceremonies, an inner strength surged within me, a primal will to survive. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled clarity, I managed to wrench my arm free and kick a nearby cult member, creating a momentary distraction. The ensuing melee was chaotic and violent. I fought with everything I had, my mind numb with a mixture of fear and fury, struggling against not only my captors but also the insidious presence of my own doppelganger. The hideout erupted into pandemonium. I stumbled through the chaos, blood and sweat mingling on my skin, desperate to escape the nightmare. In the confusion, I saw Benny being overwhelmed by another faction of cult members, his betrayal complete as he was dragged away into the darkness. I did not have the strength or time to ponder his fate. I ran blindly through the forest, the cult's shouts and the doppelganger's mocking laughter echoing in my ears. The path was treacherous, slippery with rain and obscured by fog, but my only thought was to reach safety. I eventually emerged onto a rocky precipice near the imposing Seneca rocks, where the storm raged with a vengeance. Amid the crashing rain and swirling mists, I paused to catch my breath only to confront the ultimate horror. There, in the center of the tempest, stood my doppelganger, waiting. The final confrontation was as surreal as it was brutal. We circled each other on that desolate rock face, our reflections merging with the chaos of the storm. His eyes, burning with malevolence, challenged me with every step. In that moment, it was as if every doubt, every fear, every fragment of my past manifested in his sinister grin. We clashed, not merely in physical blows, but in a struggle of identity, a desperate battle to reclaim my own soul. The fight was ferocious and exhausting. I grappled with the impossible, each blow striking a chord of deep personal anguish. And then, with one final desperate act, I managed to land a blow that sent him staggering backward into the swirling mists. For a heartbeat, the world was silent, as if the storm itself held its breath. When the wind resumed its mournful cry, the doppelganger was gone, vanished into the shroud of rain and fog, leaving me to wonder whether I had truly defeated him or simply escaped his grasp. I don't know how long I remained there, alone on that rocky precipice, battered by the elements and haunted by the memories of what had transpired. My body was broken, my spirit scarred, but I had reclaimed a measure of my identity. Climbing back into my battered RV, I resolved to drive away from Seneca Rocks and the nightmare that had nearly consumed me. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew that the cult's influence and the specter of my own darkness might one day find me again. As I drove away, the landscape receded into a blur of rain-soaked darkness. The memory of that night, of my doppelganger's malevolent eyes and Benny's treachery, remains etched into my mind. I have learned that in the remote wilds of West Virginia, the line between human cruelty and supernatural horror is perilously thin, and that sometimes the most terrifying enemy is the reflection staring back at you from the mirror. Even now, every time I catch a glimpse of my own face in a window or a rearview mirror, I am reminded of that final, fateful confrontation. A reminder that some ghosts are not easily laid to rest. And as I continue on, scarred but resolute, I know that the shadows of Seneca will forever be a part of me, a lingering testament to the night when I faced my own darkness and survived. Oh, 3 Mini. My name is Anna Caldwell. I am 34 years old. This happened in the fall of 2023, when my friends and I decided to escape the relentless pace of Charleston, West Virginia, and seek refuge in the remote backwoods of Greenbrier County near Lewisburg. We set out in my old RV, a rusted, temperamental vehicle that had seen better days, with hopes of documenting local folklore, and perhaps, unwittingly, stepping into a nightmare that would change all our lives. I've always been the level-headed one in our group, naturally assuming the role of leader when our adventures turned unpredictable. Along with me were Marcus Reed, Jenna Morales, Ethan Brooks, and Sam Walker. Marcus was our thrill seeker, eager to chase legends even if his actions sometimes bordered on recklessness. Jenna, sensitive and cautious, always sensed when something was off. Ethan, the skeptic, relied on logic and practicality, while Sam was the quiet, dependable soul whose steadfast presence comforted us all. Our plan was simple: travel through West Virginia's storied landscapes, camp beneath the ancient pines, and explore tales of the wendigo, a creature of local lore said to be a gaunt, towering figure cursed with insatiable hunger. We were drawn to the mystery and the challenge, convinced that a little adventure would remind us of life's raw, unfiltered beauty. Our journey began with promise. The RV chugged along the winding roads, and the crisp autumn air hinted at adventure. Yet, it wasn't long before the first signs of trouble emerged. Deep in the night, on a deserted stretch of road, the engine began to sputter. I pulled over, and despite my best efforts, the RV refused to start again. At the same time, our flashlights began to dim unexpectedly. Batteries that had worked perfectly fine just hours before now lay dead, as if drained by an unseen force. Tensions simmered even then. Marcus dismissed the situation with a careless laugh, urging us to push forward into the forest rather than waste time on repairs. Jenna's eyes were wide with worry as she insisted we should heed the warnings of the locals we'd passed earlier at a small gas station, where an attendant had spoken in hushed, fearful tones about the woods. Ethan, ever the rational one, began fiddling with the radio. However, instead of our usual clear static, we were greeted by strange garbled voices and erratic bursts of static that seemed to whisper our names. Our destination was a remote clearing just outside Lewisburg, a place reputed to be steeped in history and dark secrets. As we finally managed to start the RV with a temporary fix, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest itself seemed to whisper warnings. While driving along narrow logging roads, I caught sight of deep scratch marks etched into the trees, marks that were too deliberate to be the work of any animal. That night, as we set up camp, the stillness was shattered by eerie howls echoing through the pines, leaving a cold dread that clung to our hearts. The next morning, while we grabbed breakfast at a small diner in Lewisburg, an old local leaned in close and murmured, "Don't go deep into the woods. There are things you don't understand, curses that shouldn't be disturbed." His eyes darted nervously, and his warning sent shivers down my spine, but Marcus simply scoffed at the superstition. It was in that moment I sensed the first crack in our unity, a subtle division between caution and the reckless allure of forbidden discovery. As dusk fell on our second day in the forest, things escalated rapidly. While we were gathering firewood, the RV's radio once again began acting up. This time, it filled the silence with distorted voices that sounded almost human. Marcus, ever the risk-taker, argued we should use the radio to try and contact someone, but Jenna, trembling, begged us to leave the area immediately. The arguments grew heated. Ethan tried to mediate, his logical mind insisting there was a technical explanation, but the mounting unease was palpable. Then came the first violent encounter. We were huddled around the campfire when a distant, blood-curdling scream ripped through the night, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps crunching over fallen leaves. I remember seeing a fleeting glimpse of something, a gaunt, towering figure silhouetted against the dim light of the fire. It moved with a predatory grace that sent a jolt of terror through my body. The legend of the wendigo, which we had once considered mere myth, suddenly felt horrifically real. The tension in the group reached its breaking point that night. Amid our fearful whispers and frantic preparations, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He suddenly proposed that we venture deeper into the forest, insisting he knew a shortcut to a clearing where we could find answers to the disturbing events. His eyes glittered with a dangerous mix of ambition and something far darker. I hesitated, but before I could protest, Marcus had already led a small contingent away from the safety of our camp. leaving Jenna, Ethan, and me behind. It wasn't long before the horror of his decision came crashing down upon us. While following Marcus's lead, the group was ambushed by a cadre of masked individuals. The attack was sudden and brutal. Shouts, the clash of physical force, and the sickening sound of agony filled the air. I remember how in an instant chaos reigned. In the midst of the turmoil, Sam was grabbed and dragged into the darkness by these unknown assailants. I screamed his name, but the overwhelming sound of violence drowned out my pleas. I felt a searing pain in my heart as our group was torn apart, and I realized with cold certainty that this wasn't just an encounter with a supernatural creature. It was something far more sinister and orchestrated. In the aftermath, we regrouped in a clearing where fear and betrayal intermingled. Jenna's eyes were red from crying, and Ethan's calm facade was shattered by a deep, gnawing dread. It was then that the horrifying truth emerged. Marcus had been in secret communication with a local faction, an ancient cult that worshipped the Wendigo. His motivations, driven by greed and a twisted desire for notoriety, had led him to betray us. The realization stung bitterly. How could someone we trusted so implicitly choose darkness over our collective safety? Despite our shock and despair, we knew we had to act. I resolved to rescue Sam, determined to face the danger head-on, even as the forest around us seemed to conspire against our very survival. Guided by a desperate need for redemption and armed with what little we had left, flickering flashlights, a malfunctioning radio, and a map scrawled with cryptic local lore, we set out toward the location Marcus had indicated. The further we ventured, the more the forest revealed its malevolent character. The trees grew thicker, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes, and the silence was punctuated by distant, mournful howls. At one point, I discovered ritualistic symbols carved deep into the bark of an ancient oak. Each mark seemed to pulsate with a dark energy, confirming our worst suspicions. We were in the heart of a cursed domain. After what felt like hours of tense, nerve-wracking travel, we arrived at the cult's hideout, a clearing shrouded in mist, where crude altars and torches created a scene of unspeakable horror. I could hear muffled screams coming from within a crude structure, and my stomach turned as I recognized the unmistakable sound of Sam's terrified cries. The building was surrounded by hooded figures, their eyes hidden in shadow, performing what could only be described as a ritual. The air was thick with the stench of burning herbs and something fouler still, blood. The sight nearly broke me. I could see Marcus in the distance, his expression twisted in regret and desperation as he attempted to mediate between us and the cult. His betrayal had left a scar that would not soon heal, but now was not the time for recriminations. We had to save Sam. Sneaking closer, Jenna, Ethan, and I devised a plan. Our only chance was to create chaos, divert the cult's attention, and slip in to rescue Sam. Every step was fraught with danger. Each crunch of dry leaves underfoot echoed like a death knell in the oppressive silence of the woods. The moment of reckoning came swiftly. As we launched our surprise attack, the cult members reacted with violent fury. Amid the clash, I fought my way toward the building where Sam was held captive. Inside, I found him bound and bruised on a crude stone altar, his eyes wide with terror. Before I could free him, a monstrous figure burst through the darkness, a towering, emaciated being with eyes that burned like embers. The Wendigo had arrived. Its presence was both surreal and terrifying. The creature's gaunt face was framed by tangled hair, and its elongated limbs moved with an unnatural fluidity. The creature's hunger was palpable, its mere presence radiating a malevolent energy that paralyzed me for a heartbeat. I could hear the enraged shouts of cult members scrambling in terror as the wendigo advanced, tearing through the circle of hooded figures with savage, inhuman strength. In the ensuing melee, the chaos was absolute. Marcus, his face contorted in anguish and regret, tried to intervene on our behalf. In the confusion, he was struck down. His final act one of desperate, futile atonement. I later learned he succumbed to his injuries, a tragic casualty of his own treachery. His death, though it cut deep, served as a grim reminder of the cost of betrayal. With the Wendigo's unholy rampage sending cult members fleeing into the night, I managed to free Sam from his bonds. He was barely conscious, his body battered, and his spirit shattered by the ordeal of torture that had been inflicted upon him. Jenna and Ethan rallied around us as we made a frantic, perilous escape from that cursed place. The forest, now echoing with the creature's haunting howls and the dying screams of the cult, seemed determined to hold us captive in its nightmare. We stumbled back to the RV with our wounded souls and broken bodies, hearts pounding in unison with our frantic steps. The malfunctioning equipment, the dead batteries, the eerie radio static, all of it now seemed like ominous harbingers of the night's horrors. As we sped away from the dark clearing, the image of the Wendigo remained etched in my mind, a living, breathing reminder that some legends are born of unspeakable truths. In the days that followed, we sought help from local authorities, only to find that fear and silence reigned in Greenbrier County. The community, bound by long-held superstitions and terror of the ancient curse, offered little solace. The disappearance of some cult members, the inexplicable nature of the creature, and our own harrowing escape created a web of rumors and mistrust that no one was willing to untangle. I now sit at my kitchen table, nursing both physical and emotional wounds, and trying to make sense of what happened. The forest still calls to me in dreams, a constant reminder of the night when we danced with darkness, the weight of betrayal, the violent loss of Marcus, and the traumatizing ordeal that Sam endured are scars I carry with every breath. The Wendigo's image haunts my every moment, a relentless specter that underscores the fragile boundary between myth and reality. I write these words not as a confession, but as a warning. The backwoods of Greenbrier County are not just a haven of natural beauty, they are also a realm where ancient curses and human treachery converge. Our journey began as a quest for adventure and folklore, but it ended in a nightmare of survival, betrayal, and the raw, unyielding terror of the unknown. Even now, when I hear a distant howl or catch a glimpse of a shadow in the trees, I am reminded that some places should remain untouched, some legends unproven, and some nightmares left unexplored. I pray that those who venture into these forsaken woods remember that survival comes at a steep price, a price measured in shattered trust, lost lives, and the indelible mark of the supernatural. And as for me, I will forever live with the knowledge that in the heart of Greenbrier, the darkness is very real, and it hungers. My name is Jason Miller. I'm 32 years old. This all happened during what was supposed to be a carefree RV trip to New River Gorge National Park in West Virginia, a trip that quickly twisted into a nightmare I still struggle to comprehend. My friends, Lily, Trevor, Karen, and I had been planning this reunion for months. We craved an escape from our busy urban lives and decided to seek solace in the wild beauty of West Virginia. We rented a beat-up RV, loaded up on camping gear, and set off with a mix of excitement and the thrill of adventure pulsing through our veins. On our first day in New River Gorge, the landscape was breathtaking. The river roared below towering cliffs, and the winding trails promised hidden waterfalls and secret vantage points. But that first night, as we settled around the RV, something felt off. Our GPS glitched repeatedly, and the portable generator sputtered and died as darkness fell. Worse, there were strange markings on the trees, a series of crude, almost ritualistic symbols that none of us could explain. I remember Karen's soft voice, edged with unease. Maybe we should take these warnings seriously, as we examined one of the carvings up close. Trevor, ever the skeptic, simply shrugged it off, but even he couldn't hide a flicker of concern. And Lily, our ever-adventurous spirit, laughed off our apprehension. "It's just nature's art," she joked, though I could see the underlying tension in her eyes. The next morning, we encountered an old park ranger while picking up supplies in a nearby town. His grizzled face and wary eyes told a story of his own. "There's talk among the locals of something called the shifter," he warned in a gravelly voice. "A skinwalker, they say, able to mimic voices, appearances, and it's linked to a cult that's been haunting these woods for years. Be cautious on the remote trails." His words, heavy with local lore and unspoken dread, only deepened the disquiet we all felt. Despite the warnings, our desire for adventure pushed us deeper into the wilderness. I led the group along a narrow, overgrown path, insisting we'd soon find the perfect spot for photos. Lily's impulsiveness got the best of her when she strayed from the group, determined to capture what she called the raw beauty of the backwoods. I remember calling out her name, but her laughter faded into silence, replaced by an eerie, uncharacteristic stillness. It wasn't long before we discovered evidence that something was terribly wrong. In a clearing not far from our path, we found her camera discarded on the ground, its lens cracked as if by a sudden, violent impact. Nearby, her backpack lay open, belongings strewn about in disarray, and traces of a struggle marked the earth. Panic set in instantly. Lily was missing. Tensions soared. Trevor's usual calm turned into frantic reasoning. She couldn't have gone far, right? There must be a trail. While Karen's eyes brimmed with tears, pleading silently for some explanation. I, however, felt a surge of responsibility and determination. I vowed that we'd find her, no matter what it took. Our search led us to an abandoned shack hidden among dense thickets. As we crept inside, the stench of decay and old blood hit us hard. There, in the dim light, we uncovered a horrifying scene. Human remains strewn about. Crude, ritualistic symbols painted on the walls and, disturbingly, personal items that unmistakably belonged to Lily. It became painfully clear that we were dealing with more than just a missing person. We'd stumbled into the lair of a sinister cult, one that worshipped the entity known as the Shifter. Before we could process our grim discovery, we were ambushed. Masked figures, their eyes glinting with a wild, fervent intensity, descended upon us. In the ensuing chaos, I was overpowered. I distinctly remember the searing pain of a blow to the head, the crushing weight of arms around me, and then nothing but darkness. When I awoke, I found myself bound in a dank, claustrophobic cell. The air reeked of sweat and decay, and muffled chants echoed in the distance. I soon realized I was not the only captive. I heard muffled cries from another cell, a voice that I recognized as Karen's. Through the haze of pain and confusion, I learned that the cult had abducted us all, albeit in stages. While I was being tortured for information, each strike and every interrogative whisper pushing me further into despair, Karen was suffering her own ordeal. During a particularly brutal session, I felt a change in her voice over the intercom, a cold, unnatural tone that didn't sound like her at all. Later, when she was returned to our cell, her eyes were vacant, and she muttered disjointed words, as if possessed by a malevolent force. It wasn't just physical pain. The psychological torment was relentless. I could hear voices in my head, whispers that mimicked Lily's laughter, urging me to obey their dark commands. My mind teetered on the edge of sanity as I struggled to make sense of what was happening. As hours bled into days, I pieced together bits of overheard conversations. The cult's leader, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, spoke reverently of the shifter, describing it as an entity that could assume the form of its victims and bring about the downfall of those who dared trespass in its sacred grounds. Worse still, I discovered that one of our supposed allies, a local guide we had trusted, had been working with the cult all along. His betrayal stung deeply. I recalled the friendly smile he had worn when he offered to help us navigate the remote trails. A smile that now seemed like a mask concealing unspeakable evil. Time lost meaning in that hellish cell until one fateful moment of clarity. Karen's brief return to herself. A moment when her eyes met mine with desperate pleading. In that fleeting instant, we both understood that if we were to survive, we had to act. In a surge of adrenaline-fueled resolve, Karen whispered details of the cult's hideout, a ramshackle building deep within the forest where they performed their rituals. That night, while our captors slept fitfully, Trevor, whose muffled voice we'd managed to catch through a thin wall, signaled that he and a now traumatized but alive Lily had managed to break free. Somehow, in the chaos of the ambush, they'd escaped their confines. Their rescue would be our only chance. My resolve hardened as I endured the torturous interrogation, clinging to the hope of reuniting with my friends. I focused on the small details, the shift in my captor's routine, the creaks in the old building structure, and the sound of distant chanting that grew louder as if beckoning me to join their dark communion. When the opportunity finally came, a moment of confusion during one of the cult's rituals, I managed to break free from my bindings. The corridors outside were dark, lit only by flickering torches. Every step was a battle against pain and fear, but the thought of rescuing Karen and reuniting with Trevor and Lily spurred me onward. I moved silently, retracing the route I remembered from earlier in the day, following the faint sounds of distant struggle and chanting. The hideout was a twisted labyrinth of makeshift chambers and ritual spaces. In one room, I witnessed the unthinkable. Karen, still partially under the influence of the shifter, was bound to an altar as cult members performed a grotesque rite. Their chants grew louder, and in the center of the room, the shifter manifested. Its form was fluid and disturbing, a grotesque blend of human features and bestial distortions that seemed to shift and warp with every heartbeat. I froze in terror as it turned its gaze upon us, its eyes void of any humanity. At that moment, the local guide, our betrayer, appeared, his face contorted in fanatical delight. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed, revealing his true allegiance. Before I could react, he lunged forward, knocking me back and sending me crashing into a rough stone wall. The impact dulled my senses, but I fought against the darkness that threatened to overtake me. Meanwhile, Trevor and Lily had begun their rescue mission from another side of the compound. I could hear their shouts and the sound of a violent struggle echoing through the corridors. Their voices were beacons of hope amid the cacophony of terror. In a desperate bid, Trevor managed to overpower one of the cult members, securing a set of keys that he believed would unlock our cells. With a strength born of sheer desperation, I pushed through the pain and regrouped with Karen, who was still struggling to free herself from the lingering influence of the shifter. I whispered, "Stay with me, Karen. We're getting out of here." Her eyes flickered with the semblance of her old self, and for a moment, hope sparked amidst the horror. Together, we fought our way toward the exit as the cult members, enraged by our defiance, closed in. In the ensuing melee, violence erupted in every corner. I managed to fend off one attacker with a broken piece of wood, while Karen, momentarily clear-minded, helped disarm another. The sound of clashing metal and desperate screams filled the air. Every instinct screamed at me to run, yet I knew that leaving behind those I cared about was not an option. Just as it seemed we might reach the compound's perimeter, the traitorous local guide reappeared. With a swift, almost surgical betrayal, he struck down one of our rescuers, Trevor, leaving him grievously injured on the cold, hard ground. In the chaos that followed, I felt a searing pain as a blade sliced across my arm. Blood mixed with rain as the battle became a blur of violence and loss. I saw Lily across the compound, battered but alive, her eyes filled with terror and determination. Mustering every ounce of strength, I crawled toward her, pulling her to safety as cult members and the unearthly shifter closed in around us. The creature's shrieks echoed through the forest, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. In one final desperate act, I confronted the traitor. "Why?" I demanded, voice hoarse with pain and disbelief. His answer was a twisted laugh, a sound devoid of humanity, and then he disappeared into the shadows, leaving us to face the horror we'd unleashed. By some miracle, or perhaps sheer will, Lily and I managed to break free from the compound's grip. We ran blindly through the dark forest, the sounds of pursuit fading only as we plunged deeper into the undergrowth. Behind us, Karen's anguished cries echoed, and I prayed silently that she'd find her way back to sanity. We emerged onto a narrow, muddy trail just as dawn broke, our lungs burning and our minds numb with shock. The forest was silent now, the supernatural terror seemingly subsiding, replaced by the stark, brutal reality of our injuries and losses. We had escaped the cult's hideout, but not unscathed. Trevor lay motionless, his life hanging by a thread, and Karen remained a mystery, her mind shattered by possession, her fate uncertain. The aftermath of that night is a haze of trauma and bitter memories. I carry scars, both physical and mental, that remind me of the evil lurking in the wilderness of a New River Gorge. The local authorities, when they finally arrived, could only piece together fragments of our story. Their skepticism of our tale did little to erase the evidence, the strange markings, the ruined equipment, and the chilling accounts of a creature that defied explanation. I sometimes wake from nightmares with the echo of the shifter's voice in my ears, its unholy whispers reminding me that some secrets in the backwoods are better left undisturbed. I have learned, through brutal experience, that nature holds mysteries far darker than any urban myth. And though I survived that night of terror, the memory of betrayal, the horror of being captured and tortured, and the loss of friends continue to haunt me. I have no illusions that our ordeal is over. The evil we encountered still lurks in the shadows of the New River Gorge, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too far off the beaten path. My name is Jason Miller. I'm 32 years old, and I will never forget that night. A night when the line between human cruelty and supernatural horror blurred into an unending nightmare. My name is Sarah Evans. I'm 29 years old. This happened last autumn when I decided to leave behind the suffocating memories of a tragic past and seek solace at Blackwater Falls State Park in West Virginia. I'd been tormented by guilt ever since a car accident, one that claimed an innocent life, haunted my every waking moment. I thought that a long, solitary journey in my old RV might finally give me the space to face my demons and perhaps find some measure of forgiveness. The drive to Blackwater Falls was uneventful at first, the radio murmuring old tunes and the road unwinding beneath me like a ribbon of possibility. But as I approached the park, the once familiar hum of my RV began acting up. The electrical system flickered, the interior lights danced on and off, and my phone, which had been my tether to the outside world, lost its signal repeatedly. I chalked it up to my aging rig and the remote nature of the park, but a chill in my spine told me something was amiss. I set up camp near the falls, choosing a spot that overlooked the roaring cascade. The raw beauty of the scene was breathtaking. Water plunging into a churning pool, mist rising like ghostly figures in the pale light of dusk. Despite the beauty, a sense of foreboding hung in the air. As night fell, I could hear faint, sorrowful whispers carried on the wind, like distant cries lost in time. At first, I tried to convince myself it was the wind, or the cascading water playing tricks on my ears. But deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. Over the next few days, oddities continued to plague me. The RV's problems worsened. The engine sputtered unexpectedly, and the battery drained without warning. One night, while I was trying to fix a stubborn wiring issue, I noticed soft footsteps outside, circling my rig. I peeked through the window and caught a glimpse of something white, a fleeting vision of a woman in a flowing dress, standing at the edge of the trees. When I turned on the lights, she was gone, leaving only the echo of her sorrow in the darkness. I tried to brush off these experiences as stress-induced hallucinations. After all, I was alone, isolated in a place with its own history and legends. But then I found something that changed everything. While exploring a narrow, overgrown trail near the falls, I stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. Inside, amidst the dust and decay, I discovered a weathered journal tucked away in a creaking drawer. The pages were filled with letters and scribbled notes, chronicling a passionate but doomed romance. The writer spoke of a woman, described in reverent, heartbreaking detail as the Lady in White, a spectral figure whose tragic story involved betrayal and a sudden, violent end near these very falls. I spent hours poring over the journal in my RV, each word stirring memories of my own guilt and grief. The more I read, the more I felt an inexplicable connection to this ghostly woman. It was as if her sorrow was a mirror reflecting my own hidden torment. That night, I sat outside in the cold, damp air watching the falls when I heard her voice. A soft, mournful sigh carried on the wind. I couldn't tell if it was real or a figment of my imagination, but it sent shivers down my spine. I began to experience vivid dreams. In these dreams, I was back in the moments leading up to the accident, the weight of my mistake crushing me with unbearable regret. In one recurring vision, I saw a woman in a white dress, her eyes filled with a profound sadness, reaching out to me as if to offer forgiveness or perhaps to condemn me further. I awoke in a cold sweat, the image seared into my mind. One chilly evening, while I was venting my frustration at the failing RV and my own mental state in a small town nearby, I encountered a local man. His eyes were hard, and his voice carried an edge of suspicion as he confronted me. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he warned, insisting that I was inviting trouble by wandering these cursed lands. He tried to force me into his truck, claiming he would protect me from the ghostly scourge that plagued the park. I managed to break free from his grip, heart pounding, and fled back to my RV. When I later reported the incident to the local sheriff, my story was met with skepticism. They said nothing of the Lady in White or the strange occurrences, as if my experiences were nothing more than the ramblings of a troubled mind. Despite these unsettling encounters, I felt compelled to confront the mystery head-on. The journal had hinted that the Lady in White's appearances were tied to moments of deep emotional crisis. I began to wonder, was she merely a spectral embodiment of the park's tragic past, or was she drawn to me because of my own inner darkness? On the night of a violent storm, with thunder shaking the heavens and rain lashing against the RV, I felt an irresistible pull towards the base of the falls. The roaring water seemed to call my name, promising answers or perhaps a reckoning. With nothing left to lose, I left the relative safety of my rig and made my way along the slippery, muddy path towards the falls. As I neared the roaring cascade, the wind howled, and the air grew thick with mist. And then I saw her. Standing in the torrent of water, illuminated by flashes of lightning, was the lady in white. Her figure was translucent, yet strikingly real, her eyes reflecting centuries of sorrow. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as the spectral figure advanced slowly, her white dress billowing around her like the remnants of lost time. "Why are you here?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and longing. In response, she raised a hand, and the sound of the falling water seemed to dim, replaced by a heart-wrenching melody of grief and remorse. In that moment, I realized she was a mirror of my own soul, haunted, burdened by loss, and desperately seeking absolution. The storm intensified, and the falls roared with renewed fury, as if echoing the turmoil within me. I found myself confessing aloud, pouring out the guilt I had carried for so long. The dreadful accident, the life lost, the chance I never had to make amends. The rain washed over me, blurring the lines between reality and hallucination, and for a brief, agonizing moment, I felt as if the ghostly presence of the lady in white was forgiving me. Her eyes, deep pools of sorrow, met mine. I sensed a profound sadness, a deep-seated pain that transcended time. It was as if she carried the burden of every tragedy that had ever occurred near these falls. And in that shared moment of vulnerability, the oppressive weight of my guilt began to lift, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope for redemption. But as quickly as the moment of connection came, the vision began to fade. The lady's form wavered and dissolved into the stormy night, leaving me alone with the relentless roar of the falls and the pounding of my own heart. I staggered back to my RV, my mind reeling from the encounter. Had she truly been there, or was I merely succumbing to the isolation and grief that had plagued me for so long? In the following days, the haunting presence of the lady in white gradually receded. The RV continued to act up, and I struggled with equipment failures and the relentless sense of isolation, but the ghostly visits became less frequent. I started to feel that maybe, just maybe, I had been given a chance to atone for my past. The journal remained with me, a constant reminder of the tragic love and loss that had marked this land, and perhaps my own life. Though I left Blackwater Falls eventually, the memories of that stormy night, the spectral figure, and the catharsis it brought lingered with me. I sought professional help to confront my lingering guilt and to piece together the shattered remnants of my life. While I still walk a precarious line between reality and the echoes of my past, I have come to understand that forgiveness, both from others and from oneself, is a journey that never truly ends. Even now, on quiet nights, I can still hear the soft, mournful whispers on the wind, and I sometimes catch a glimpse of a figure in white out of the corner of my eye. I try not to let fear take hold, for I believe that the lady in white was not a harbinger of doom, but rather a tragic spirit offering a chance at redemption. Her sorrow was a mirror to my own, and in that reflection I learned that true healing begins when we are brave enough to confront the darkness within. I don't know if the ghost is truly gone or merely waiting in the shadows for the next soul burdened by regret. But I do know that my journey, painful and terrifying as it was, has given me a glimmer of hope. The echoes of the past may always whisper in the wind, but I now walk forward with a heart that, while scarred, is ready to embrace the possibility of a new beginning. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 40 years old. This happened last winter when I left behind a bitter divorce and years of urban disillusionment to seek solace in the vast, wild expanse of Dolly sods in West Virginia. I was desperate to escape the ghosts of my past, hoping that isolation and nature's raw beauty would offer me a fresh start. I set out in my old RV, a battered relic that had seen better days, much like me. The drive from the city was long and lonesome, with endless stretches of dark roads punctuated by the occasional flicker of a town's neon sign. By the time I reached Dolly sods, the RV began acting up. Lights flickered, the engine coughed, and my radio emitted nothing but static. I brushed it off as the price of solitude, though a creeping unease began to settle over me. I parked near a small clearing on the edge of the wilderness. The landscape was surreal, a sea of rugged terrain, dense forests, and rocky outcrops that looked almost sculpted by some ancient hand. It was beautiful, but there was something foreboding in the silence, a quiet that wasn't peaceful but laden with secrets. A few nights in, during a torrential downpour, I found something unexpected. Stepping out to check on the RV's failing battery, I discovered a wounded dog limping along the path. Its matted fur and wary eyes stirred compassion in me. I coaxed it close and managed to bandage a deep gash on its side. I fed it scraps from my meager supplies and decided to let it stay with me. In that lonely wilderness, the company of even a stray dog was welcome. For several days, the dog, whom I came to call Shadow because of its elusive presence, kept me company. But one morning, after a restless night punctuated by low, mournful howls echoing through the trees, Shadow was gone. I searched around the RV, calling its name, but found no trace except for a few tufts of fur caught on a broken branch, some torn scraps of fabric, and a faint, dark trail of blood. An ominous chill ran down my spine. Determined to find answers, I decided to follow the trail. The deeper I ventured into the wilderness, the more I noticed strange markings on the trees, deep gouges and symbols etched crudely into the bark. At first, I dismissed them as the handiwork of local vandals or perhaps even other campers, but the pattern felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. Not long after, I encountered Roy. I met him by chance on a narrow trail as he offered me a friendly nod. He was a local with weathered features, his eyes reflecting a familiarity with these lands that I envied. "You're far from civilization, aren't you?" he said with a rough charm. "If you need guidance around here, I can show you the safe spots." His offer was welcome, and I accepted, grateful for a friendly face in the desolation. Roy led me deeper into the wilderness, pointing out hidden clearings and advising caution around certain areas. Yet, as the days passed, I began to notice discrepancies in his stories. He'd talk vaguely about the old ways and sacred grounds in hushed tones, and every time I asked for details, he would quickly change the subject. A creeping suspicion began to gnaw at me, but I had no concrete evidence, just an uneasy feeling that Roy knew more than he let on. One foggy afternoon, while following Roy along a particularly dense part of the woods, we stumbled upon a grim scene. In a secluded clearing, partly concealed by overgrown shrubs, lay a grotesque tableau. Scattered human remains, marked with strange symbols painted in what looked disturbingly like blood. The sight made my heart race with primal fear. I tried to look away, but the images burned into my mind. Roy's face was inscrutable, his eyes hard as stone as he casually remarked, "That's the price you pay for wandering in these parts." His tone, laced with an unsettling calm, sent shivers through me. Before I could question him further, the atmosphere shifted. Roy's expression turned sinister, and I suddenly realized his friendly demeanor had been a facade. Out of nowhere, he signaled, and shadowy figures emerged from behind the trees. In a heartbeat, I was ambushed. The figures, dressed in tattered, grimy clothes and bearing the marks of a fanatic cult, closed in around me. I fought back, but their numbers overwhelmed me, and within moments I was bound and dragged away into the depths of the forest. I awoke in a dim, crude cell fashioned out of rotting wood and stone. My head throbbed, and my limbs ached from the rough handling. I could hear distant chanting, low and rhythmic, echoing through the darkness. Every so often, I caught glimpses of horrifying symbols carved into the walls, their edges softened by time and ritualistic use. I knew then that I was in the hands of a cannibal cult, an extremist sect that worshipped a creature they called the wendigo. During my captivity, the cult subjected me to relentless physical and psychological torment. They prodded and mocked, their eyes shining with fanatic intensity. I was forced to endure brutal interrogations, where they demanded that I renounce my past life and embrace their twisted beliefs. Amidst the suffering, I experienced surreal, nightmarish visions. Flickers of a monstrous form with emaciated features and elongated limbs, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly hunger. The visions were so vivid that I could almost feel its cold, insidious presence stalking me in the shadows. It was during one of these visions that I realized the true nature of the cult's worship. They believed the wendigo was not merely a creature of myth, but a living embodiment of nature's savage, insatiable hunger, a force that demanded sacrifice and feasted on the essence of human life. Their rituals were designed to invoke this creature's presence, and in the grip of terror, I could hear the cult chanting in a language that curdled my blood. Days, or perhaps hours, it was hard to tell, passed in that hellish cell until a moment of opportunity presented itself. Amidst a lull in the cult's activities, I managed to overpower a distracted guard, retrieve a set of crude keys, and free myself from my bindings. My heart pounded as I crept through the labyrinthine corridors of the cult's hideout, every step a battle against pain and fear. The corridors were dimly lit by flickering torches, their light casting grotesque shadows on the walls. I pressed on, driven by a desperate need to escape and the memory of my life outside this nightmare. As I navigated the maze-like structure, I could hear the distant sound of chanting growing louder, mingling with the guttural howls of the wendigo that haunted my visions. I finally reached a wide, open chamber, a crude altar room where the cult had gathered. In the center of the room, bathed in the dim light of a solitary torch, stood an effigy covered in ritualistic symbols, and there, among the gathered cultists, I saw the wendigo. The creature's form was shifting and fluid, a grotesque distortion of human and animal, its presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. Its eyes burned with an unholy fire as it moved, as if it were aware of our intrusion. Panic surged through me, but adrenaline lent me the strength to act. I lunged forward, tackling one of the cultists in a desperate bid to create chaos. In the ensuing melee, the room erupted into violent chaos. The cultists screamed and scattered, their unified purpose shattered by my sudden rebellion. I managed to slip out of the chamber amidst the confusion, my body battered but my resolve unbroken. Outside, the dense forest seemed to come alive with the sounds of pursuit. I ran blindly through the dark undergrowth, the inhuman howls of the wendigo echoing behind me, mingling with the shouts of the remaining cultists. Every branch that snapped, every rustle in the underbrush, made my heart race with terror. I could feel the creature's presence stalking me, a relentless predator in the wilderness. After what felt like an eternity of running, I found refuge in an old, abandoned ranger station nestled on the outskirts of Dolly sods. I collapsed inside, my body trembling and my mind reeling from the horrors I'd endured. The dawn crept slowly over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pale gold and gray. I huddled in a corner, bloodied and exhausted, hoping against hope that help might come. But even as I waited, the nightmare wasn't over. The local authorities, when they finally arrived, listened with skepticism to my tale of cannibal cults and the wendigo. They offered no comfort, only disbelieving shrugs and murmurs that I was a man on the edge of sanity. I was left with nothing but my scars, both physical and psychological, and the haunting memories of the unspeakable horrors in the depths of Dolly sods. Weeks later, as I struggled to rebuild my shattered life, I couldn't shake the feeling that the wilderness had marked me indelibly. Every creak of the old trees, every distant howl in the night, brought me back to that hellish ordeal. The face of the wendigo, its eyes filled with a ravenous, ancient hunger, haunted my dreams. And the betrayal of Roy, the friendly guide who had lured me into that trap, seemed to echo in every quiet moment, a reminder that trust could be as treacherous as the dark woods themselves. I've come to realize that the true horror of that winter wasn't just the monstrous wendigo or the fanatical cult. It was the profound isolation and vulnerability that allowed such darkness to flourish. I learned that sometimes, when you venture too deep into the wild, you find not just nature in its raw, indifferent majesty, but also the lurking evils born of human desperation and the untamed forces of the earth. I continue to live with the scars of that ordeal, both visible and hidden deep within my soul. The wilderness has a way of seeping into you, of imprinting its dark secrets on your heart. I still hear the echoes of that night, the distant chanting, the inhuman howls, and sometimes when I'm alone, I feel that the wendigo's presence is never truly gone, just waiting in the shadows for another moment of weakness. My name is Michael Turner, and I survived the howling shadows of Dolly sods. Yet, survival came at a terrible price. A life forever marked by betrayal, violence, and the chilling reminder that the darkness of the wild can reach into the very depths of your soul. My name is Sarah Thompson. I am 29 years old. This happened in the baffling, wind-swept expanse of Dolly sods, West Virginia. I had driven my old RV deep into the heart of Dolly sods wilderness, seeking escape and solace from the crushing grief that had consumed me since my sister's death. The open road and desolate landscape promised a kind of isolation I hoped would give me time to face my guilt and sorrow. I thought the wilderness might offer me a fresh start, a quiet place to slowly mend my broken heart. Instead, I found a nightmare that blurred the lines between memory, hallucination, and the supernatural. The journey began on a brisk autumn morning, the air crisp and the sky a steel-gray canvas. The RV's engine grumbled as I navigated the twisting, uneven roads leading to one of West Virginia's most remote stretches. I'd planned every detail meticulously, though I never imagined that my escape would be marred by unexpected failures. Within the first few hours of setting up camp, my RV's generator sputtered and then died entirely. Without a reliable power source, my phone's battery drained quickly, and the world outside became a vast, silent wilderness. The first night was eerily quiet. I remember setting up my small camp outside the RV, the barren moors and rocky outcrops casting long shadows under the moonlight. But even in that silence, there was a disturbance. I found large, oddly patterned footprints near the edge of my camp. Too deliberate and too large to belong to any creature I knew roamed these parts. A chill crept up my spine as I inspected them, and a deep unease settled over me. As the days passed, strange phenomena began to infiltrate my solitude. I would catch fleeting reflections in the RV's window, shadowy images that looked disturbingly familiar. Yeah, Sometimes, in the periphery of my vision, I glimpsed a sorrowful face that resembled my late sister, though I quickly dismissed it as a trick of my grief-weakened mind. Yet, at night, the wind seemed to carry soft, indistinct whispers, and even the sound of quiet sobbing, echoing across the barren landscape. One afternoon, while exploring the nearby remnants of an abandoned cabin, I discovered a tattered journal. Its pages were filled with local lore and warnings of a spectral figure known only as the Forsaken. According to the entries, this apparition was the tormented spirit of someone who had suffered an unspeakable tragedy, condemned to wander these wild lands. The journal claimed that the Forsaken preyed on those overwhelmed by sorrow and loneliness, a chilling mirror to my own heart. My emotional state grew increasingly fragile with each passing day. The RV's intermittent power failures and the harsh, unforgiving environment of Dolly sods conspired with my inner demons. I began to lose track of time. There were moments when I would wake up in a different part of the RV or even outside with no recollection of how I'd gotten there. Bruises would appear on my arms, as if I'd been touched by an unseen, icy hand. The cold that seeped into my bones seemed more than just the chill of autumn. It was as if an unnatural frost had taken residence within me. I tried to rationalize everything. Perhaps the isolation was playing tricks on my mind, and the sounds in the night were nothing more than the wind rustling through dead trees. But the journal's ominous words and the inexplicable encounters weighed heavily on me. Each night, I would lie awake listening to the mournful sounds of the wilderness, feeling as though I were being watched by a sorrowful presence. One stormy evening, when the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, I decided to venture out. I needed to confront the truth of what was happening. Clutching the journal, I walked toward a clearing where the wind was the fiercest, the barren moors twisting under the turbulent sky. As I stepped into the clearing, a spectral figure emerged from the mist. A ghostly apparition draped in tattered, shadowy garments. Its eyes, filled with an endless sadness, locked onto mine. For a moment, I was paralyzed by a mix of terror and a haunting familiarity. The figure's form wavered and shifted, and for a heart-stopping instant it bore an uncanny resemblance to my sister. My breath caught in my throat as conflicting emotions surged within me. An unbearable longing mingled with an acute sense of dread. The Forsaken spoke no words, yet its presence screamed in the silence, echoing the deepest parts of my grief. Tears welled up as I realized that the apparition was forcing me to confront the guilt and regret that had gnawed at my soul since my sister's passing. I clutched the journal tightly, my voice trembling as I began to read passages aloud. I recited the words as if they were a plea for absolution, a desperate attempt to release the burden of sorrow that had chained me to my past. With every word, the wind seemed to pause, the storm's fury momentarily subsiding, as if the wilderness itself was listening. The confrontation was as much an internal battle as it was a struggle against the spectral entity. My heart pounded with fear and sorrow as I challenged the Forsaken, demanding to know why it had chosen to torment me. In response, the figure's form flickered violently. One moment it was the sorrowful visage of my sister, and the next it transformed into something far more malevolent, a twisted mockery of her beauty and kindness. The juxtaposition of loss and horror was unbearable, and I felt my sanity teeter on the edge. In that turbulent moment, I realized that the spirit fed on my unresolved grief, growing stronger with every tear and every whispered lament in the dark. The realization was both devastating and liberating. I understood that to break free from this torment, I needed to forgive myself and let go of the past. The Forsaken's hold over me was as much about my inner demons as it was about the supernatural forces at work in these desolate lands. As the storm raged overhead, I reached a breaking point. I screamed into the night, a raw, cathartic release of all the pain and regret that had haunted me for so long. The sound of my own voice, amplified by the wind, seemed to shatter the eerie silence that had enveloped the clearing. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, as if in response to my defiant cry, the spectral figure began to dissolve, its form wavering like a mirage in the rain. The Forsaken's departure was not a grand exorcism, but a slow, painful fading away, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of sorrow and a palpable sense of relief. I sank to my knees, drenched in rain and tears, feeling as if I had been stripped of the weight of my grief. The journal lay open beside me, its pages now fluttering in the wind as though released from the curse they had carried. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences gradually diminished. The RV's power issues persisted, a constant reminder of my fragile state, but the oppressive presence of the Forsaken receded into the background. I spent long hours reflecting on the ordeal, writing down every detail in a new journal, one that chronicled not just the terror of the supernatural, but also the painful journey towards self-forgiveness and healing. Yet, even as I left Dolly sods behind, the memory of that stormy night lingered like a specter of its own. I often wonder whether the entity was real or merely a manifestation of my grief-ridden mind. Perhaps the barren moors and howling winds conspired to create a vivid hallucination, a final, agonizing reminder that some wounds, no matter how deeply inflicted, can only begin to heal when we confront them head-on. I returned to a life that was forever altered by my time in the wilderness. The pain of loss had not vanished, but it had transformed into a bittersweet memory, a reminder that healing is a process marked by both darkness and light. In the quiet moments of solitude that still punctuate my days, I sometimes hear the faint echoes of that storm, a distant reminder that even in the most desolate places, there is a path to redemption. The experience taught me that isolation can be both a sanctuary and a prison. The vast, unforgiving landscape of Dolly sods exposed my vulnerabilities, forcing me to confront the demons within. And while the Forsaken may have been nothing more than a spectral projection of my inner turmoil, its impact was undeniably real. I learned that healing begins when we allow ourselves to face our deepest fears, and in doing so find the strength to forgive, not just those who have wronged us, but also ourselves. Now, as I drive my battered RV on quieter roads far from the moors, I carry with me the memory of that harrowing night. I know that the scars will remain, etched into my soul like the weathered pages of an old journal. But I also know that I survived, that I found a way to break free from the shackles of grief. And though the wilderness still whispers in the quiet moments, I have learned to listen, to let the voices of the past guide me gently toward a future where hope, however fragile, can take root. My name is Lucas Myers. I am 40 years old. This happened at Blackwater Falls State Park, West Virginia. I left behind a life full of painful memories and relentless urban noise to seek solace in the rugged wilderness. As a former military man, I had learned to live with isolation, yet nothing could have prepared me for the haunting stillness of Blackwater Falls. I had parked my old RV near a secluded section of the park, determined to confront the ghosts of my past and find a semblance of peace. I imagined the solitude would give me time to heal, to wrestle with my PTSD and find some control over my inner turmoil. Instead, what I encountered in those dark, dense woods would push me to the edge of my sanity. The journey to Blackwater Falls had been long and uneventful. The RV, a battered relic of better times, groaned as it navigated the winding forest roads. By the time I arrived, Dusk was settling over the forest, bathing everything in deep shadows and muted colors. I set up camp with the care of a soldier on guard duty, inspecting every corner of my temporary refuge. But almost immediately I began to notice something was off. That first night, as I sat outside the RV trying to coax warmth from a malfunctioning heater, I heard it. A low, mournful howl echoing through the trees. It was not the howl of any ordinary animal. It carried a sinister quality, a mix of pain and fury that sent shivers down my spine. My instincts, honed through years of service, told me to be on alert. I checked the perimeter of my campsite, flashlight in hand, and that's when I discovered large, unnerving tracks near the edge of the clearing. They were too big and too deliberate to belong to any common forest creature. A creeping sense of dread settled over me, but I pushed it aside with rationalizations. Perhaps it was just a bear or some other nocturnal animal. The next morning, I attempted to restore power to my RV. The electrical failures continued. Flickering lights and a dead phone left me with no means of communication. My solitude was now complete, and not by choice. Determined to get some answers, I decided to take a short patrol around the campsite during dusk. As the sky turned a deep orange and the forest began its nightly transformation, I caught a glimpse of something moving swiftly between the trees. For a split second, I saw eyes that glowed in the fading light. Then darkness swallowed the figure. My pulse raced as I recalled the howls from the night before. I began piecing together fragments of local lore I'd heard from a park ranger, a grizzled man who reluctantly mentioned a creature known to the locals as the howler. He had described it as a beast shrouded in mystery, responsible for bizarre animal mutilations and unexplained disappearances in the area. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Night after night, the eerie howls returned, growing louder and more insistent. I started finding signs of struggle near my RV, scratched earth, broken branches, and the occasional smear of blood on a rock. Each new sign chipped away at the illusion of safety I'd hoped to find here. One particularly stormy night, the situation reached its breaking point. The wind howled like a chorus of anguished souls, lashing against the RV and making the entire forest seem alive with malevolence. I was in my small, cluttered living area when the RV shuddered violently. I rushed outside, heart pounding, to see the rain hammering down in torrents, obscuring my vision. In the midst of the storm, I caught a glimpse of a hulking shape darting between the trees. Its form was obscured by rain and darkness, but as it moved closer, I could see it more clearly. A creature with ragged, matted fur, an unsettling blend of wild animal and something far more sinister. It was then that I was ambushed. Out of nowhere, the beast lunged at my RV with a fury that took me by surprise. I scrambled back, adrenaline surging as my military instincts took over. The howler's attack was brutal. Sharp claws and powerful jaws tore into the side of my RV, sending splinters of metal and wood scattering across the ground. I managed to grab a heavy metal pipe from inside the RV and swung it wildly. The impact rang out in the chaos, and the creature let out a blood-curdling howl that echoed through the storm. I fought back with every ounce of strength, every skill honed from years in the field, but the creature was relentless. It circled my battered RV like a predator stalking its prey, its eyes glowing with an almost human-like intelligence that made my skin crawl. As I landed another desperate blow, a surge of flashbacks from my combat days overwhelmed me. Faces of fallen comrades, the sounds of battle, the relentless violence that had haunted me long after the war ended. In that moment, I realized that this fight was not only against a monstrous beast, but also against the demons that had tormented me for years. After what felt like an eternity of desperate struggle, the creature finally retreated into the storm. I was left bruised, bleeding, and trembling in the cold rain. I managed to barricade my RV as best as I could, my hands shaking from exhaustion and fear. With the immediate threat temporarily pushed back, I knew I needed to understand what I was up against if I was to survive. The following day, I scoured the surrounding area for any sign of the creature's lair or evidence of its victims. I found scattered remnants, torn pieces of clothing, chewed remains of what looked like a trap, and even some discarded personal items that hinted at previous victims. Each discovery was a grim reminder that I was not alone in this nightmare. Determined to prepare for another inevitable encounter, I started setting up makeshift defenses around my campsite. I placed sharpened logs and metal scraps in strategic positions, and every hour I took turns patrolling the perimeter, armed with a hunting rifle I had brought along. The nights were the worst. The oppressive silence would break with sudden, vicious howls that made my heart race and my hands tremble on the trigger. On the third night, under a moon that was half hidden by thick clouds, I decided to confront the terror head-on. I left the RV and slowly made my way into a clearing not far from my camp. Every step felt like a gamble, the damp earth and twisting trees creating a labyrinth of shadows and hidden dangers. Then, out of the darkness, I saw it again. The howler emerged from the underbrush, its massive form illuminated briefly by a flash of lightning. I could see the ferocity in its eyes, and for a split second I thought I saw something almost human, a glimmer of sorrow and regret that clashed violently with the savage nature of the beast. In that charged moment, something inside me shifted. I remembered the park ranger's hesitant words, the cryptic local pamphlets, and the strange legends whispered among the townsfolk. There was talk of a man cursed by the wilderness, transformed by loss and isolation into something monstrous, a living embodiment of nature's wrath and human despair. The idea chilled me. Was this creature merely a beast, or was it something that had once been human, twisted beyond recognition by the cruelty of fate? Driven by a mix of duty and a desperate need to end the terror, I decided to lure the howler into a trap. I returned to my RV and spent hours setting up a clearing with noise traps and barriers, hoping to corral the creature. The storm had subsided into a thick, oppressive fog that seemed to muffle all sound, and as night fell, the air grew heavy with anticipation. Then it came. The howler approached, moving with a stealth that belied its size. I could hear its low, guttural growls as it circled the clearing, its eyes reflecting the faint light of my hastily arranged lanterns. I held my breath, every muscle tense, every sense alert. Suddenly, the creature charged. In the ensuing chaos, I fought with every bit of strength left in me, using the traps I'd set as well as my own weapon. The struggle was brutal, each blow a desperate attempt to reclaim my space and my sanity. At the climax of the battle, as I managed to drive the creature toward a makeshift pitfall, I saw it pause. For a fleeting moment, in the chaotic dance of rain and flashing lantern light, our eyes met. In that look, I saw deep human sorrow, a flicker of remorse and agony that mirrored my own inner torment. It was as if the creature was pleading for release from its curse, for an end to the endless cycle of pain. That moment, brief as it was, shattered the monstrous image I had clung to. I realized that this beast was not solely an embodiment of nature's savagery, but a tragic reflection of human suffering, an echo of a man lost to despair, much like myself. The revelation gave me the strength to deliver one final, decisive blow. With a cry that was part triumph and part sorrow, I struck with everything I had, ending the creature's rampage. As it collapsed, the rain washing away the blood and grime, I knelt beside it, my hands trembling as I searched its eyes for any lingering humanity. There was nothing left now but a lifeless gaze, and I knew that my battle was over. In the aftermath, I spent long, sleepless hours tending to my wounds and reflecting on what had transpired. The physical scars would heal, but the emotional ones would take much longer to mend. I had confronted not just a monstrous presence in the wilderness, but the darkest parts of myself, my guilt, my grief, and the lingering echoes of a war that had long since ended. Packing up my battered RV the following day, I left Blackwater Falls with more questions than answers. The mystery of the howler, whether it had truly been a cursed man transformed by isolation and despair, or merely a brutal predator, remained unsolved. But the experience had changed me irrevocably. I realized that the wilderness, with all its raw beauty and merciless cruelty, had forced me to face my inner demons head-on. Driving away on a quiet, mist-covered road, I carried with me the scars of both the battle and the painful memories of my past. I knew that my journey toward inner peace was far from over, and that the ghosts of Blackwater Falls would haunt me for a long time to come. Yet, in confronting the terror of that night, I had taken the first crucial step toward reclaiming control over my life. The howler was defeated, but the wilderness had etched its lessons deep into my soul, a reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters we face are the ones lurking inside ourselves. My name is Jason. I'm 34 years old. This happened during what was meant to be a carefree escape into the wild beauty of West Virginia, a journey that quickly spiraled into a nightmare I can scarcely recall with any clarity now. We set off in an old, battered RV toward a remote camping site deep in the New River Gorge. I was with Megan, a tough and resourceful friend whose no-nonsense attitude had often been our saving grace, and Luke, a charismatic yet enigmatic thrill-seeker who always seemed to have secrets lurking behind his easy smile. I had planned every detail meticulously, convinced that the isolation of the backwoods would help us disconnect from the chaos of our everyday lives. But soon, the wilderness revealed that its silence was not a balm, but a prelude to terror. Our RV sputtered to a halt along a narrow, unpaved road just as dusk fell. The engine coughed and died, leaving us stranded in a desolate clearing with only a dwindling cell signal and a creaking, unreliable generator for company. We soon discovered that our equipment was as old as the vehicle itself. Flashlights flickered, the GPS repeatedly lost signal, and our emergency supplies were woefully inadequate for anything beyond a short detour from civilization. The chill of the evening and the heavy, oppressive mist that crept in with the darkness made it painfully clear that help was miles away. The first unsettling sign came as we were trying to fix the RV. Megan stepped away for a moment, and when she returned, her eyes were wide with alarm. "Jason, come look at these tracks," she whispered, pointing to a series of elongated, almost human-like footprints circling the RV. They were too large for any animal we knew, and their presence felt unnervingly deliberate. I dismissed it initially as an anomaly, perhaps the work of some local wildlife, but a nagging feeling told me something was off. As night deepened, the forest around us seemed to come alive with inexplicable sounds. The howls that pierced the silence were not the calls of wolves, but something more tortured. A wail that reverberated through the trees and chilled my blood. I could feel an unseen presence lurking at the edge of our camp, a malignant force that seemed to watch us in the dark. The following day, we drove into a nearby town in desperate hope of finding help. There, an old local eyed us with a mix of pity and dread. In a gruff voice, he muttered, "You folks best leave this area if you value your lives. The wendigo roams these woods, and it ain't just a story." His words, dismissed by many as old wives' tales, now gnawed at the back of my mind. things took an even darker turn that very evening. While Megan and I argued about our next move, whether to wait for a repair crew or venture into the woods in search of help, Luke slipped away without explanation. I noticed his absence only when the night deepened and a cold, uneasy silence settled over the campsite. The tension among us was palpable. Megan's face hardened with suspicion as she recounted her fleeting glimpse of Luke disappearing into the dense forest, leaving behind a trail of disturbed foliage. The horror reached its zenith when, under the cloak of darkness, an unearthly cry shattered the quiet. I rushed outside with my heart pounding, only to see a gaunt, skeletal figure lurking in the periphery of our vision. A creature with elongated limbs and an emaciated face that seemed to be carved from the very essence of despair. The locals had warned us of the wendigo, a spirit of ancient hunger that haunted these woods, and now it was here, its presence an inescapable omen of death. Before I could process the terror unfolding before me, a series of agonized screams echoed from the direction of our RV. Megan was under attack. Racing back, I discovered that a group of rough, bloodshot-eyed individuals had overpowered her. I could see in their eyes a fanaticism that bordered on madness, a belief in the wendigo's dark power that drove them to commit unspeakable acts. In a blur of violence, Megan was dragged away into the depths of the forest, her cries muffled by the howling wind and the relentless, oppressive dark. I tried to intervene, but the attackers were too many. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Luke's face, a mixture of fear and something more sinister, as he stood off to the side, not offering help, but as if he were waiting for this moment all along. The betrayal was a knife in my gut. My once trusted friend had secrets, and now those secrets had cost Megan her freedom and safety. Panicked and alone, I sprinted after the cult members, desperate to rescue Megan. The forest was a labyrinth of gnarled trees and thick underbrush. Every step was accompanied by the echo of my own pounding heartbeat and the distant, eerie calls of the wendigo. The creature's presence was everywhere, feeding off the fear that seeped from my skin. I could feel it watching, stalking me from the shadows, its hunger palpable in the air. After what felt like hours of relentless pursuit, I came upon a hidden clearing that reeked of decay and ancient rituals. There, encircled by makeshift torches and crude totems, was the cult, a ragtag band of locals twisted by superstition and a desire to harness the dark powers of the wendigo. In the center of their ritual space, Megan was bound to a stone altar, her face bruised and her spirit nearly broken. Her eyes, though filled with terror, held a spark of defiance that reignited a surge of hope within me. I hid behind a clump of dead pines, formulating a plan. The cult members were engrossed in their macabre ceremony, their chants echoing eerily in the night. I realized that I had no choice but to use their own fervor against them. Slipping silently through the trees, I edged closer to Megan. The closer I got, the more I saw the horror etched on her face, a mix of pain, fear, and an unyielding determination to survive. Just as I was about to free her, a cold, commanding voice stopped me. "Step away," it ordered, and I turned to see Luke emerging from the shadows. His eyes, now cold and devoid of the camaraderie I once knew, locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have come here, Jason," he said, his tone laced with venom. In that moment, the full weight of his betrayal crashed over me. Luke wasn't a victim of circumstance. He was a willing conspirator with the cult. His previous disappearances and secretive behavior now pieces of a sinister puzzle. Before I could react, chaos erupted. The wendigo, as if summoned by the escalating tension and the betrayal that had fractured our trio, materialized behind Luke. Its gaunt, monstrous form towered over us, eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. The creature moved with a fluid, horrifying grace, its presence turning the clearing into a battleground between man and ancient malevolence. In the ensuing melee, the cult members turned on each other in a frenzy of confusion and bloodshed. I managed to free Megan from her bindings, but our escape was far from secure. Luke, caught in the crossfire, was last seen stumbling backward into the darkness, his fate ambiguous as he was swallowed by the night and the creature alike. Desperation took hold as I dragged Megan away from the ritual site. The forest became a maze of screams, monstrous howls, and the relentless pursuit of the wendigo. Every rustle of leaves was a reminder that the creature was still hunting, its hunger unquenched by the carnage around us. We navigated the treacherous terrain, the relentless rain and biting cold heightening our sense of isolation and terror. Our flight through the woods was punctuated by brief encounters with local law enforcement, who treated our frantic cries for help with disbelief and condescension. "It's just the wind and old legends," they told me, dismissing the evidence of violence and the unmistakable terror in our eyes. Their reluctance to interfere, whether out of fear or adherence to local customs steeped in folklore, left us more isolated than ever. In the final harrowing hours of that night, Megan's condition worsened. The scars of her ordeal were not only physical but etched deeply into her psyche. Each time I looked at her, I was reminded of our collective betrayal and the monstrous reality that had overtaken our simple camping trip. I vowed to find a way to vanquish the darkness that had claimed so much already, even if it meant sacrificing what little hope we had left. By dawn, the forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds the dripping of rain and the rustling of leaves, a calm that was more unsettling than the chaos of night. Megan and I made our way back to the RV, our escape hampered by the ravaged equipment and the ever-looming threat of the wendigo. We managed to salvage some supplies and contacted local authorities once more, though their indifference only deepened our despair. In the weeks that followed, I scoured every lead and local legend, desperate to understand the nature of the wendigo and the dark cult that had preyed upon us. The memory of Megan's tortured cries and Luke's treacherous gaze haunted me relentlessly. I found fragments of lore and hints of the cult's origins, a twisted amalgamation of native superstitions and modern extremism that had long been whispered about in hushed tones in the backwoods of West Virginia. My journey to uncover the truth has left me forever changed. The wilderness that once promised freedom now represents a frontier of unspeakable horror, a reminder that isolation can awaken both the supernatural and the dark corners of human nature. I continue to search for answers, not only for Megan, whose spirit is marred but unbroken, but also for myself. The betrayal, the violence, and the relentless presence of the wendigo have taught me that in these forgotten corners of the world, trust is a fragile illusion, and survival demands a strength that is forged in the crucible of terror. Even now, as I write these words in the dim light of an old motel room far from the New River Gorge, I know that the echoes of that night will never truly leave me. The wendigo's hunger is eternal, and the betrayal of a friend is a wound that may never heal. Yet, in the midst of this nightmare, I cling to the hope that by understanding the darkness that surrounds us, I might one day find a way to overcome it. My name is Celia Harper. I'm 41 years old. This happened one autumn when I set out alone in my aging RV, determined to scatter my late husband's ashes at Red Creek Falls in the Monongahela National Forest. I had hoped the solitude of the backwoods would bring me solace and a way to mend the deep wounds of loss and regret, but nothing could have prepared me for the darkness lurking in those ancient woods. The trip began with a quiet determination. My husband had once loved this rugged landscape, and despite the bitter secrets that had come to light after his death, I clung to the memory of the happier days we'd shared. I loaded the RV with my meager supplies, a few blankets, a half-filled first aid kit, and an old, flickering lantern that I'd trusted for years. The vehicle, like much of my life, was creaking under the weight of time. Not long after I arrived at a secluded clearing near Red Creek Falls, I discovered that the RV's electrical system and heater were failing. As dusk descended and a chill wind began to sweep through the trees, I felt more isolated than ever. I set up camp in the shadow of the falls, hoping the sound of rushing water would mask the creaks and groans of the old RV. Yet, as night approached, a thick fog rolled in, transforming the landscape into a shifting maze of half-seen shapes and whispering trees. My thoughts turned inward, and grief mingled with a persistent, gnawing unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not entirely alone. The first sign that something was amiss came when I stepped out to check on the RV. Near the door, I noticed a set of wet, delicate footprints leading away into the dense underbrush. They were too fine, too precise, to belong to any animal I knew. My heart pounded as I followed them a short distance before they vanished, swallowed up by the fog. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, a byproduct of my solitude and sorrow. That night, as I sat by a small fire outside the RV, I caught sight of a pale figure moving silently among the trees. A woman in a flowing white dress, her features obscured by shadows, seemed to drift just at the edge of my vision. When I blinked, she was gone, but the lingering sadness in the air felt almost palpable. The local folklore I'd heard in passing in nearby towns whispered of a ghost known as the Weeping White. A spectral presence said to be the soul of a Native American woman wronged by settlers, doomed to wander these woods in sorrow and anger. I tried to dismiss the apparition as a trick of the light or my own mind conjuring up images from grief. Yet, as the hours wore on and the wind picked up, her presence grew stronger. I began to hear soft, mournful weeping echoing through the trees, a sound that resonated with my own hidden pain. Unable to sleep, I clutched an old, frayed blanket and stared into the darkness, every rustle of leaves sending shivers down my spine. The following morning, I ventured into the nearby small town for supplies and perhaps some human contact. The diner was a modest, dimly lit establishment, and the locals spoke in low tones. When I mentioned my destination and my plan to scatter my husband's ashes, a grizzled man, the local sheriff, leaned over and said, "Miss, I'd be careful if I were you. There's things in these woods that are best left alone. Digging into the past can stir up a whole mess." His warning was cryptic, and though I couldn't decipher all his meaning, it left me with a growing sense of foreboding. Returning to the forest, I resolved to push forward despite my mounting unease. However, as the RV's heater sputtered and failed during the brewing storm, I was forced to abandon the vehicle and seek shelter on foot. Battling biting winds and relentless rain, I found refuge in an abandoned ranger cabin not far from my campsite. The cabin's creaking timbers and moldy interior added to the atmosphere of decay, yet it provided temporary respite from the storm and the oppressive cold. Inside the cabin, I rummaged through a dusty stack of old papers and found a journal tucked away in a corner. Its pages, yellowed and brittle, belonged to a local historian who had long since vanished from public records. I spent hours poring over the diary, which chronicled a long-forgotten tragedy, the murder of a Native American woman, unjustly condemned by settlers who feared her wisdom and defied her beauty. The entries detailed how her spirit, known as the Weeping White, was doomed to roam these woods until her story was acknowledged and her name cleared. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the eerie parallels between her sorrow and my own lingering guilt over my husband's hidden past. Late that night, as I struggled to piece together the fragments of the diary by the light of my unreliable lantern, I heard footsteps outside the cabin. I peered through a grimy window and saw, in the distance, the unmistakable figure of a woman in white. This time, her face was unmistakably sorrowful, her eyes filled with a profound anguish that seemed to mirror my own. She moved closer, her form wavering between the tangible and the spectral, until she stood just beyond the threshold of the cabin. In that moment, every suppressed emotion within me surged forth, a mix of grief, guilt, and a desperate longing for redemption. "Why have you come here?" a voice whispered, carrying both accusation and lament. It was as if the forest itself were speaking to me, urging me to confront the sins of the past. I stepped outside, my feet numb and shaking, and addressed her trembling form. "I came to scatter my husband's ashes," I managed, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I thought it would bring me peace, but now I feel nothing but regret and sorrow." The ghost's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for a long, harrowing moment, the silence between us was thick with unspoken confessions. Then, as if in response to my plea for understanding, she moved closer, and a vision overwhelmed my senses. Visions of my husband, his secretive glances, and whispered conversations that hinted at a dark involvement in covering up an injustice long buried by time. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. My beloved had been part of the very history of exploitation and cruelty that had condemned this spirit to eternal wandering. The betrayal was almost too much to bear. Haunted by these revelations, I fell to my knees in the mud, overcome with anguish. The ghost, still watching me with sorrowful eyes, seemed to beckon me to rise, to confront the past rather than hide from it. In that desperate moment, I resolved to seek out the reclusive historian whose diary I had found, hoping that he might offer further clues about my husband's connection to this terrible legacy and a path toward atonement. When the storm finally subsided, I set out on a perilous trek through the forest to find any remnants of the historian's presence. The terrain was treacherous, and every step was a battle against nature's fury. The ghost followed at a distance, her mournful weeping echoing through the trees, urging me onward. After hours of wandering, I stumbled upon a crumbling stone monument, barely visible under layers of ivy and moss. Etched into the stone were names and dates, a record of those lost to the injustices of a forgotten past. There, I found further evidence linking my husband's clandestine actions to the cover-up of that ancient crime. The weight of his betrayal was crushing, yet it was also a painful key to unlocking my own path to redemption. My heart ached with the realization that I had been complicit in silencing a wrong that demanded recognition. The forest seemed to breathe around me, the air heavy with the sorrow of countless lost souls. In a desperate bid to honor both my husband's memory and the spirit's lingering pain, I returned to the clearing near Red Creek Falls. With trembling hands, I prepared a small memorial by the water's edge, a final farewell for my husband and a plea for forgiveness to the spirit of the weeping white. As I scattered his ashes into the rushing water, the wind shifted and the ghost appeared once more, her form now softened by a sorrow that bordered on resignation. "Your pain is intertwined with mine," she whispered. "Only by acknowledging the truth can both our wounds begin to heal." In that fragile moment, I felt a semblance of peace, as if the storm within me had calmed just enough to allow a new beginning. I spent the rest of the day in quiet reflection, the forest offering its own muted form of solace. The damaged RV, the failing equipment, and the harsh elements were all remnants of a journey that had forced me to confront the darkness within and around me. I knew that I couldn't undo the past, nor could I bring back those who had suffered. But perhaps, by facing the ghosts of memory and regret, I could forge a path toward redemption. Even now, as I write these words in a small journal far from the Monongahela National Forest, I can still hear the soft, mournful weeping of the weeping white echoing in my ears. The experience has left me forever changed, a solitary journey of grief, betrayal, and ultimately the hard-won power of forgiveness. I carry with me the lessons of that fateful trip, that the past, no matter how painful, must be confronted if we are ever to move forward, and that sometimes the most frightening specters are the ones that dwell within our own hearts. And so, I continue on, scarred but determined, knowing that the truth may be as bitter as it is liberating, and that healing often comes from the unlikeliest of sources, even from a ghost wandering the lonely woods of West Virginia. My name is Caleb Hart. I am 42. This happened in the winter of 2023 when I decided to flee the noise of Morgantown and its unrelenting memories, hoping that the remote stretches of New River Gorge might offer the solitude and redemption I so desperately needed. My battered RV, a relic of a past life, had been my companion through many lonely miles, but that journey was about to take a turn into a realm where guilt and ghostly whispers intertwined. I set off early one crisp morning, the landscape outside the RV window a blur of skeletal trees and distant mountains. I was a solitary traveler, driven by the need to escape the ghosts of my past, a tragedy I carried in my heart like a wound that would never heal. I kept thinking that isolation might be the cure, but as the miles ticked by, an unsettling feeling crept in, as though the very air was laden with memories not entirely my own. Almost immediately I began to notice strange occurrences. While driving down a narrow, winding road, the RV's radio, usually a constant companion, sputtered and crackled with indistinct whispers. At first, I dismissed it as a malfunction, but the voices were too clear, too childlike, echoing soft giggles that sent shivers up my spine. I couldn't understand how my old radio could pick up such eerie sounds, and soon enough I found myself questioning if I was truly alone. That night, after settling in at a secluded spot near a dense stand of trees, I was startled awake by the sound of small footsteps crunching in the mud outside the RV. The next morning, I discovered a series of tiny footprints, accompanied by even smaller handprints pressed into the damp earth. I hadn't seen a child in years, not since the accident that had left me forever haunted by guilt. In my RV, on the windshield of my mind, I saw flashes of a face I desperately wanted to forget. I began to wonder if my mind was playing tricks on me or if something else was at work. During a brief stop at a remote gas station, I encountered a local attendant who eyed me with an almost palpable wariness. When I mentioned my destination, he hesitated and leaned in, his voice low. "Be careful out there, mister. They say there's a tragedy that haunts these parts. A little girl lost and never found. Some say she lingers still, waiting for someone to help her move on." His words sent a chill through me, and though I tried to hide my reaction, I couldn't help but wonder if my buried past was somehow intertwined with this local lore. Pushing forward, I continued along the mountain road as the sky darkened unexpectedly. A violent storm began to brew, unleashing torrents of rain that hammered on the RV's roof. The power flickered, and the RV's electronics, already temperamental, grew erratic. I was forced to pull over near an abandoned cabin that sat alone on the edge of the woods. The structure was dilapidated, its windows broken and door creaking in the wind, yet it offered shelter from the relentless storm. Inside the cabin, I found remnants of a life long past. Old, yellow journal entries, faded photographs, and a tattered children's book that seemed to whisper secrets of sorrow. As I leafed through the fragile pages of one diary, I learned of a local tragedy, a little girl whose life had been cut short in an accident, her absence leaving a void in a community already steeped in mystery and loss. The entries described her as both playful and forlorn, a spirit tethered to the place by an unresolved grief. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that her story resonated too closely with my own buried guilt. That night, with the storm raging outside, I struggled to sleep in the creaking cabin. In the heavy silence punctuated by the drumming rain, I heard soft, sorrowful humming, a lullaby that I once knew from childhood. I rose, heart pounding, and stepped cautiously into a narrow hallway. There, in the dim glow of a single, sputtering lantern, I saw her, the ghostly apparition of a small girl. At first, she appeared almost innocent, her face lit by a sad, otherworldly glow. But as I watched, her smile twisted into something haunting, a mixture of sorrow and accusation. Her eyes met mine, and in that silent, agonizing moment, I was flooded with memories of the past, of a mistake that I had tried so desperately to forget. The sound of her tiny voice filled the room, whispering, "Why did you let me go?" Each word was like a dagger, reopening old wounds and forcing me to confront the guilt I had carried for so long. I had once been responsible for an accident, a moment of carelessness that led to irreparable loss. I had tried to run from that memory, but here, in the heart of the wilderness, it had returned to demand reparation. As the storm howled outside, I sat on the cold, creaking floor, paralyzed by the apparition's presence. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls whispering echoes of remorse. The ghostly child circled slowly, her movements graceful yet filled with an unnatural urgency as if she needed to be seen and understood. I reached out a trembling hand, desperate for a connection, for forgiveness, even if it was from a spirit. In that moment of raw vulnerability, the storm outside intensified, as though mirroring my inner turmoil. Lightning flashed through broken windows, casting the room in stark, fleeting images of the past. I could no longer ignore the guilt that had festered within me, the endless nights of self-reproach, and the quiet despair that had driven me to these lonely roads. The ghost's mournful eyes seemed to implore me to acknowledge my responsibility and seek redemption. Tears mingled with the rain as I whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The words were fragile, carried away by the wind, yet they felt like the beginning of an unspoken absolution. For what felt like an eternity, the ghost simply looked at me, her expression softening. Then, as the first light of dawn seeped through the splintered wood, she began to fade, a delicate wisp of sorrow and relief, leaving behind only a lingering whisper that said, "Thank you." The storm subsided, and with it, the oppressive weight of the night began to lift. I sat in the silence of the abandoned cabin, my heart heavy yet strangely lighter, as if a burden had been partially lifted. I knew that the journey toward redemption was far from over. The ghost's presence had forced me to confront what I had long denied. I spent the rest of the day repairing the RV as best I could, the echo of that final whisper serving as both a benediction and a reminder that healing requires acknowledgement of one's past. As I drove away from the cabin, the roads of New River Gorge unfolded before me, shrouded in mist and memory. Every mile I traveled was a step toward confronting the parts of myself I had buried deep. I carried the journals and the faded photographs as tokens of a life lost, a reminder of the tragic consequences of neglect and remorse. I resolved to honor that lost child by dedicating my journey to making amends, to a quiet promise of redemption that extended beyond my own guilt. In the weeks that followed, I encountered more signs that I was not entirely alone on these haunted roads. The RV's radio, once a vessel for eerie whispers, now occasionally played soft, indistinct lullabies that made my skin crawl with both fear and familiarity. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a small spectral figure watching from the trees. And sometimes, in the quiet moments just before dawn, I could swear I heard her gentle giggles carried on the breeze, a bittersweet reminder that the past and the need for forgiveness never truly fades away. I've learned that isolation can be a double-edged sword. In the quiet solitude of New River Gorge, I was forced to face the unrelenting truth of my own heart. The journey was not just a physical escape, but an emotional pilgrimage into the depths of my own remorse and the possibility of redemption. The ghost of the lost child taught me that sometimes the only way to move forward is to confront the darkest parts of our past, to offer a sincere apology to the memory of those we have failed. Now, as I sit behind the wheel of my RV, traveling along a winding mountain road bathed in the soft light of a new day, I can still feel the echoes of that stormy night. I am not the same man who once drove away from Morgantown in desperate need of escape. I am a man who has been forced to reckon with his past, who has seen the pain of a ghostly child and, in her silent forgiveness, found a spark of hope. I know that the road ahead will be long and fraught with challenges, and the whispers on the radio may one day return to remind me of the fragile nature of redemption. But for now, I move forward with a quiet determination, carrying the memory of that little girl and the lessons she imparted, that even in the darkest corners of guilt, there lies a possibility for healing, and that sometimes the path to forgiveness begins with a single, heartfelt apology whispered into the night. The ghost may be gone, but her presence lingers, a soft, persistent murmur in the recesses of my mind. And as I drive on, I am reminded that while the journey of redemption is never truly complete, each mile brings me closer to a man who can finally forgive himself. My name is Daniel Reyes. I am 38. This happened last autumn when I left Huntington in my weathered RV, driven by a desperate need for closure. I had spent years chasing stories as an investigative journalist, but nothing had ever hurt quite like the disappearance of my former partner, a mystery that had eaten away at me for too long. I set my course for Harper's Run, a remote hamlet in West Virginia, whispered about in local legends and draped in fog and sorrow, convinced that among its abandoned logging sites and forgotten mining ruins, I might finally uncover the truth. The journey began with an unsettling quiet. The roads twisted through dense, ancient forests, and as the miles ticked by, my old RV's radio started acting up. Instead of the usual static or forgotten tunes, I heard distorted voices, whispers that unnervingly mimicked my own tone. At first, I chalked it up to faulty wiring, but soon the words became indistinct echoes of my inner doubts and regrets. It felt as if the machine was broadcasting not just interference, but fragments of my own unspoken thoughts. A few hours into the drive, I stopped at a rundown gas station on the outskirts of a small town. The attendant, a taciturn old man with deep-set eyes, regarded me with a mix of pity and caution. When I mentioned Harper's Run, he leaned in and murmured, "Be careful out there, son. Down in Harper's Run you might see more than your eyes can bear. Sometimes what you see is the echo of your own soul." His words, vague and haunting, settled in my mind as I continued my journey. Once I reached Harper's Run, an oppressive fog had swallowed the landscape. The air was thick, every sound muffled, every turn of the road shrouded in uncertainty. As I parked the RV near the outskirts of the abandoned logging sites, I noticed something odd. In the cracked mirror of the RV, a shadow passed behind me, a figure that resembled me in every detail, but with an expression twisted in disdain. I spun around, but the road was empty. The encounter left a residue of paranoia that I couldn't shake, even as I set up camp for the night. That evening, as darkness fell and the fog deepened, I began my investigation. I rummaged through old dumpsters and searched dilapidated structures near the logging sites. I found faded missing persons flyers, one of which featured a photograph of my former partner, his eyes pleading silently for help, and others that referenced people who had vanished without explanation. The connections were tenuous, but the more I uncovered, the more I felt the heavy weight of an unseen presence watching and waiting. The RV's radio continued to play its disconcerting symphony of voices. One night, while reviewing my notes by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, I heard my own voice over the static, a recorded phrase from a conversation long past, laden with regret. It wasn't a recording I recognized. I had never made that recording. The echo of my own words, distorted and accusing, sent a chill down my spine. Days bled into one another in a haze of uneasy exploration and creeping dread. I began to see my doppelganger with increasing frequency. Sometimes it was in the window of a long-abandoned house. Other times, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure moving independently along the overgrown path by the RV. Each encounter was brief, a fleeting reflection that vanished when I turned to confront it. The more I saw it, the more I felt that it was not a mere trick of the light, but a manifestation of something deeply personal, a dark mirror reflecting my own guilt and failures. One afternoon, while following a lead that took me to the outskirts of an old mining area, I was stopped in my tracks by a sudden, violent noise. I stepped out of the RV to find my surroundings ransacked, my notes scattered, my equipment vandalized with what looked disturbingly like smeared, blood-like marks. I realized then that I wasn't the only one interested in Harper's run. A group of locals, their eyes cold and voices low, had ambushed me, demanding that I leave. Their hostility was palpable, a mixture of fear and protectiveness, as though I were interfering with secrets best left buried. I managed to escape, but the encounter left me rattled and convinced that every reflective surface might harbor the image of my own inner demons. With my mind unraveling under the dual pressures of external threats and internal torment, I pressed on toward the heart of Harper's Run, a decrepit mine known in local lore as a place where the lost lingered. As I approached the mine's rusted entrance, the air grew colder, and the pervasive fog seemed to thicken into a tangible barrier between me and the world outside. Inside the mine, the darkness was absolute. My flashlight beam cut weakly through the void, revealing crumbling walls and relics of a once thriving industry now consumed by decay. As I ventured deeper, every step was accompanied by the sound of my own heartbeat and the distant echo of footsteps that didn't belong to me. Then, in the narrow corridor, I saw it, the doppelganger, standing silently at the end of the passage. It was me, yet not me. Its eyes burned with an intensity of accusation, its posture radiated despair, and its presence filled the space with a malignant energy. For a long, agonizing moment, we simply stared at each other. In that silence, the figure began to speak, not with words, but with a torrent of images and memories. I was forced to relive the worst moments of my past. The night my partner vanished, the helplessness that followed, the relentless guilt that had haunted me ever since. It was as if this shadow was every regret I had ever tried to bury, coming forth to remind me of my failures. In the midst of this internal storm, a voice echoed through the mine, a gravelly, enigmatic sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. An old local, much like the man at the gas station, emerged from the shadows. He explained in a tone that was both ominous and sorrowful that Harper's Run was cursed, a place where unresolved guilt and sorrow took form, manifesting as tangible, malevolent shadows. He told me that my doppelganger was not a separate entity but an echo of the remorse and self-recrimination that had festered within me, given life by the malignant energy of this forsaken place. The revelation hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I realized that the journey I had embarked upon was not just an investigation into a string of mysterious disappearances, but a confrontation with my own darkest self. The old man's words offered little solace. Instead, they demanded that I face the truth head-on. In that dank, oppressive mine, I had a choice: surrender to the paralysis of guilt and let the shadow consume me, or fight back against the weight of my own memories and claim a semblance of redemption. With a surge of defiant resolve, I steeled myself. The confrontation that followed was as much an internal battle as it was a physical one. The doppelganger lunged, and in the ensuing struggle, I found myself grappling with a part of me I had long denied. Every punch and every parry felt like a desperate attempt to silence the voices of my past. My RV, my research, my entire existence seemed to hang in the balance as I fought not just for my life, but for my sanity. The fight was brutal and disorienting. The corridors of the mine seemed to warp and twist under the pressure of my inner turmoil. In a moment of clarity amid the chaos, I realized that to defeat the doppelganger, I had to accept every part of my past, my failures, my regrets, and the pain of losing someone I once cared about deeply. With a cry that resonated with years of pent-up anguish, I whispered, "I accept you. I accept myself." In that instant, the shadow faltered, its movement slowing as if struggling against the weight of my acknowledgement. The struggle reached its climax when, with a final desperate effort, I managed to subdue the doppelganger. As the figure dissolved into a burst of darkness, the oppressive energy in the mine lifted ever so slightly, leaving behind an eerie silence that was both liberating and sorrowful. The old man's words echoed in my mind. The darkness was not gone, but it could be faced and understood. I emerged from the mine battered and bruised, both physically and emotionally scarred. The encounter had left me with a deeper understanding of the burden I had carried for so long, a burden that was as much a part of me as the blood in my veins. The journey through Harper's Run had forced me to confront the echoes of my past, to see the face of my own guilt staring back at me from every reflective surface. As I climbed back into my RV, the distorted voices on the radio had finally fallen silent, replaced by a quiet, almost mournful stillness. I knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but I also understood that the first step toward healing was accepting the truth about myself. With a heavy heart but a newfound resolve, I set off once again, leaving Harper's Run behind. Its haunted echoes would always linger in my mind, a constant reminder of the price of buried guilt and the thin line between reality and the demons we create. Driving along the winding back roads of West Virginia, I couldn't help but glance at every reflective surface, each window, each puddle, wondering if the shadow of my past might reappear. But now, I was no longer afraid. I carried with me the knowledge that confronting my own darkness was the only way to find the truth, to seek redemption, and perhaps to finally put the ghosts of my past to rest. Even as I continue my journey, the memory of that day in the mine remains etched into my soul, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying battles are fought within, and that every echo, no matter how hollow, holds the key to understanding who we truly are.